You take one more step toward that elevator, I will put you on the ground. The hand closed around her forearm, 5 fingers, full grip, tight enough to shift the fabric of her sleeve against her skin. The lobby of the Albert V. Bryan Federal Courthouse was 32 feet of polished marble between the metal detector and the elevator bank, and the man in the gray court security officer uniform had just made those 32 feet into a border. She did not pull away. She looked at the hand. She looked at the ceiling, the dark half-dome of a security camera, its red recording light pulsing once, twice, steady. She looked at the man's badge, Prewitt. She looked at his eyes. A federal courthouse guard had just threatened to put a woman on the ground. The woman was a United States District Judge, confirmed by the Senate 11 days ago, commissioned to this building, assigned to this bench. He did not know that. He would. The red light blinked. Steady. 6 hours earlier, the morning had started with silence and coffee. Nadine Okafor's Arlington apartment sat 14 minutes from the courthouse by car, 18 if the Key Bridge backed up, which it did on Mondays. She had timed the drive twice over the weekend, once Saturday, once Sunday, mapping routes, noting traffic cameras, memorizing the turn from Washington Street onto the courthouse block. The kind of preparation most people reserved for job interviews, the kind she had done before every posting for 19 years. She made coffee at 5:12 a.m. black, no sugar. Black. No, the mug was her mother's, white ceramic, a faded logo from a cleaning company that no longer existed. Okafor and Daughters Commercial Services. Her mother had started it with $600 and a used van in 1991, had run it for 23 years, had cleaned office buildings, courthouse lobbies, hotel conference rooms, on her hands and knees when the industrial buffer broke, which was often because she bought equipment secondhand and parts were expensive. Nadine had cleaned alongside her from age 11 to 17, every Saturday, sometimes Fridays after school if there was a rush job. She knew the smell of industrial floor wax the way some people knew their grandmother's perfume. It was memory-made chemical, embedded in the sinuses, permanent. Her mother had died in 2021. Pancreatic cancer. Fast, merciless, the kind that announced itself only after it had already won. Nadine had been a magistrate judge in the District of Columbia at the time, 8 years on the bench, respected, published, quietly building the kind of record that attracted attention from Senate Judiciary Committee staffers. Her mother had never seen the inside of a federal courtroom except to clean it. Nadine finished her coffee, rinsed the mug, set it upside down on the drying rack. She dressed in a charcoal suit, no robe, not yet, robes stayed in chambers, and comfortable flats, because her first day would involve more walking than sitting. She packed a banker's box, the framed photo of her mother at the company van, a brass desk clock that had belonged to her father, a leather portfolio, and a copy of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, dog-eared, spine cracked, the same edition she had used in law school 22 years ago. She folded her coat into a precise rectangle and placed it on top of the box. Then she walked through the apartment once, checking windows, testing locks, scanning the counter for anything left behind. She counted the items in the box by touch, murmuring each one under her breath. Photo, clock, portfolio, rules, coat. 5 items. She would count them again when she arrived. The parking garage beneath the courthouse was cold at 5:58 a.m. Her judicial parking pass, level B2, space 14, had not been activated. The gate arm did not rise when she held her badge wallet to the reader. She pressed the intercom. No answer. She pressed it again. Static, then nothing. She parked in the public garage across the street instead. $4 an hour, 8-hour maximum. She took the ticket, tucked it into her portfolio, and walked toward the courthouse entrance carrying the box against her hip. The Albert V. Bryan Federal Courthouse occupied a full block of Alexandria, Virginia. Limestone facade, glass curtain wall, the words United States Courthouse carved above the entrance in letters large enough to read from across the street. Nadine had been inside the building twice before, once for her formal interview with the chief judge, once for a facilities walkthrough 3 weeks ago. Both times, she had entered through the judicial side entrance on the north face of the building, escorted by a clerk. Today, the side entrance keycard reader rejected her credentials. She pressed her card to the reader 3 times. Each time, the small LED flashed red. The door did not click. The lock did not release. She walked around to the main public entrance. At 6:02 a.m., the lobby was nearly empty. 2 security lanes were open. 1 court security officer sat behind the X-ray monitor. Another, the name tag read Prewitt, stood at the walk-through metal detector, feet planted, arms crossed, the posture of a man who owned the 12 square feet he was standing on. Ahead of Nadine, 2 men in suits approached the checkpoint. The first held up a laminated bar card without breaking stride. Prewitt glanced at it, nodded. The man collected his briefcase from the X-ray belt and walked through. The second man did the same. Bar card up, nod, through. Neither man had his bag opened. Neither man was asked for a driver's license. Neither man was stopped. 40 seconds each, start to finish. A woman in a navy blazer followed. Same routine. Bar card, nod, through. 35 seconds. Nadine approached the checkpoint. She set the banker's box on the conveyor belt and reached into her portfolio for her identification. Prewitt's posture changed. His arms uncrossed. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Nadine and the metal detector. A small shift, 6 inches of lateral movement, but it transformed the checkpoint from a passage into a gate. ID. 1 word. No ma'am. No good morning. Just the demand. Nadine handed him her Virginia driver's license and, beneath it, the letter. 2 pages. Department of Justice letterhead, embossed seal, the signature of the Attorney General, confirming the appointment of Nadine A. Okafor to the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. Prewitt looked at the driver's license. He held it under the light, tilting it, checking the hologram. He looked at Nadine. He looked at the license again. Then he set the appointment letter aside, on the counter, face down, without reading it, and placed the driver's license on top. This doesn't look like a bar card. It's not a bar card. It's an appointment letter from the Department of Justice. We need bar cards or court-issued credentials for non-public floors. You have either of those? My court-issued credentials haven't been activated yet. That letter explains why I'm here. Prewitt picked up the letter, read the first 3 lines, set it back down. His face registered nothing. No recognition, no curiosity, no adjustment. The words, United States District Judge, were printed in 14-point font on the second line. He had either not read them or not believed them. If you're hooked on stories of justice and hidden identity reveals, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Behind the X-ray monitor, the second CSO, a woman whose name tag read Embry, leaned forward in her chair and looked through the plexiglass partition at Nadine. Then at Prewitt. Then back at Nadine. Are you here for a hearing? Embry's voice carried across the checkpoint, loud enough for the 2 attorneys now waiting behind Nadine to hear. Defendant check-in is around the corner to the left. The sentence landed in the lobby like a coin dropped in a quiet room, clear, sharp, specific. Not a question about which courtroom. Not an offer to help locate a hearing date. The assumption was singular and complete. Black woman, banker's box, no bar card, defendant. I'm not here for a hearing. I'm reporting for duty. Embry's eyebrows rose. A slow theatrical arc. Reporting for duty where? Chambers, 4th floor. 4th floor is judicial chambers only. Yes. The single word sat in the air between them. Embry stared. Prewitt stared. The 2 attorneys behind Nadine shifted their weight but said nothing. Prewitt pulled the banker's box off the conveyor belt before it reached the X-ray machine. He set it on the counter and opened the flaps. I'll need to inspect this manually. He lifted the framed photograph. Nadine's mother, standing beside the company van, age 47, wearing the uniform she had sewn herself because commercial cleaning supply companies didn't make uniforms in her size. Prewitt held the frame at arm's length, turning it over, examining the backing as if checking for contraband. He set it down on the metal counter without care. The frame hit the surface with a hard tap that made Nadine's jaw tighten. He lifted the brass clock, turned it upside down, shook it once, hard. The mechanism inside made a thin metallic protest. Set it next to the photo. He opened the leather portfolio. Inside were 3 legal pads, blank, 2 pens, a pocket constitution, and a folded printout of an email. He flipped through the legal pads, fanning the pages. Then he lifted the email. The email was dated the previous Friday. From USMS Administrative Services, Eastern District of Virginia. To Alexandria Courthouse Facilities. Subject, New Judicial Officer Credentialing. Judge Okafor, EDVA. Action required. Activate keycard assigned number JUD-4407. Parking access. Level B2 space 14. Chambers, access room 412. Deadline, COB. Friday. Prewitt looked at the email. He looked at Nadine. He folded the email and put it back in the portfolio. He did not comment on it. He did not acknowledge the word judge in the subject line. He closed the portfolio and placed it back in the box. I'm going to need you to wait over here. He gestured toward the public waiting area, a row of molded plastic chairs against the east wall of the lobby, bolted to the floor, the kind found in bus stations and county jails. 3 of the chairs were occupied, 2 men in handcuffs sitting beside a U.S. Marshal and a woman reviewing paperwork with a public defender. Prewitt was directing a federal judge to sit in defendant seating. Nadine looked at the chairs. She looked at the men in handcuffs. She looked at Prewitt. Why? We can't verify your credentials until the clerk's office opens. That's 8:30. You'll need to wait. It's 6:15. Yes, ma'am, it is. 2 hours and 15 minutes, in a plastic chair, next to men in restraints, on her first day. Nadine picked up her box. She walked to the waiting area. She sat down in the 4th chair from the left. She placed the box on her lap, opened the portfolio, and removed a pen and legal pad. She began writing. The first entry, 6:04 a.m. Appointment letter presented to CSO Prewitt. Badge visible. Name tag legible. Letter set aside face down without full reading. Directed to defendant processing by CSO Embry. No other individual in lobby redirected. She wrote the second entry, 6:07 a.m. Property manually inspected. Framed photograph handled roughly, placed on metal counter without padding. Brass clock shaken. Portfolio opened and contents examined. Credentialing email observed by CSO Prewitt. No acknowledgement of judicial appointment referenced in subject line. She was building a record. Contemporaneous notes, time-stamped, written in the moment. The kind of documentation that held up in federal court because it was created before the outcome was known, before memory could reshape events, before institutional narratives could harden into official versions. The public defender, sitting 3 chairs away, glanced over. Young, early 30s, overwhelmed, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying 60 open cases and sleeping 4 hours a night. She was wrestling with a stack of folders, muttering under her breath about a scheduling conflict. If the scheduling order was entered under the local rule, you can file a motion to continue under Rule 6(b). Nadine said it without looking up from her legal pad. The clerk's office usually grants those within 48 hours if both parties consent. The public defender turned, stared, opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Nadine's suit, her posture, the legal pad covered in precise handwriting. Do you practice in this district? I'm new here. The PD waited for more. Nadine returned to her notes. The conversation was over. At 6:22 a.m., Prewitt picked up the phone behind the security desk. He spoke in a low voice, one hand cupped around the receiver. Nadine watched from the corner of her vision. She could not hear the words, but she watched his mouth move, watched him glance toward her twice, watched him nod. He hung up. 2 minutes later, a man appeared from the corridor behind the checkpoint, younger, broader, wearing the dark blue uniform of the U.S. Marshals Service. His name tag read Keel, Deputy U.S. Marshal Dorian Keel. Keel walked to the security desk. Prewitt handed him the appointment letter and the driver's license. Keel studied both, holding them side by side, comparing the photograph on the license to the woman sitting in the plastic chair 30 feet away. He turned the letter over, checked for watermarks, held it to the light. Then he walked to Nadine. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Marshal Keel. I understand there's a credentialing issue." "There's no issue with my credentials. There's an issue with your system not activating them. This letter doesn't have a credential number. Anyone can print DOJ letterhead." "Call the Clerk of Court's office. They'll confirm my appointment." "Clerk's office doesn't open until 8:30. "Then call the U.S. Marshal Service District Office. They issued the credentialing order last Friday." Keel looked at the letter again. "Ma'am, I'm going to hold on to this for now." "That's my original appointment letter." "I understand. I'll return it once we've verified. In the meantime, I'll also need your phone." The lobby went quiet. Even the public defender stopped shuffling papers. "My phone," Nadine repeated. "For security purposes. During identity verification, we sometimes hold personal devices." "Under what authority?" "Courthouse security protocol during identity verification." "Which protocol number?" Keel's jaw worked. A muscle in his cheek twitched, the involuntary tell of a man reaching for an answer that did not exist. "Standard operating procedure." "I'll keep my phone." Nadine's voice did not rise. It did not sharpen. It remained exactly as it had been since she walked through the door. Measured, precise, the cadence of someone who had spent 19 years controlling courtrooms with tone rather than volume. Keel stared at her for 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked back to the security desk, the appointment letter still in his hand. Nadine wrote another entry. 6:22 a.m. Deputy Marshal Keel requested surrender of personal cell phone. Cited no specific protocol or statutory authority. Request denied. Keel retained original appointment letter. No property receipt issued. She looked up at the ceiling camera again. Red light. Steady. Recording. At 6:35 a.m., a new person appeared at the checkpoint. Not a law enforcement officer, but a civilian in khakis and a polo shirt. Lanyard badge swinging from his neck. Wells Ingham, IT/facilities. He spoke with Prewitt and Embry in low voices, then walked behind the security desk to a computer terminal. He typed for 30 seconds, frowned, typed again. Nadine watched him. She could not see his screen, but she watched the rhythm of his keystrokes. Quick, then a pause, then quick again. The pattern of someone searching, not finding, searching again. Or the pattern of someone finding exactly what they expected and deciding what to do about it. Ingham turned to Embry. He spoke 4 words, loud enough for Nadine to hear. Nothing active for that name. But Nadine had the email. The email sent Friday at 3:12 p.m. from the USMS Administrative Services Office to this building's facilities coordinator, to Wells Ingham, instructing him to activate her credentials by close of business Friday. And she had Ingham's reply, sent at 4:58 p.m. that same day. Confirmed. All access activated. The access had not been activated. The email said it had. Someone had confirmed completion of a task they had not performed. Whether that was negligence or something else, Nadine did not yet know. But the gap between the email and the reality was a fact, and facts were what she built cases on. She wrote the entry, 6:35 a.m. Facilities Coordinator Wells Ingham checked system. Stated aloud, nothing active for that name. Contradicts USMS email dated Friday, 3:12 p.m., which instructed credential activation by COB Friday. Ingham's reply at 4:58 p.m. confirmed activation. Discrepancy noted. She photographed the email on her phone, took a screenshot, saved it to her camera roll into her cloud backup. Then she put the phone in her jacket pocket, face down, screen locked. At 6:47 a.m., Embry walked to the waiting area carrying a clipboard. Ma'am, I need to take a photograph for our incident log. An incident log. Anytime a person is held for verification at the checkpoint for more than 30 minutes, we create an incident report. I need a photograph for the file. You're creating an incident report about me. About the situation. It's standard. Am I the subject of the report or a witness? Embry blinked. It's just for the file. I decline to be photographed for an incident report in which I am not being charged, not being investigated, and not under suspicion of any crime. If you'd like to create a report, you may note my name, the time of my arrival, and the nature of the credential failure. I'll provide you with the email documenting that the failure was on the part of your facility's coordinator, not on my part. Embry stood holding the clipboard for 3 full seconds. Then she lowered the camera feature on the tablet attached to the clipboard and walked back to the desk. As she passed Prewitt, she muttered something Nadine did not catch, but Prewitt's smirk was visible from 30 feet away. At 6:50 a.m., Prewitt left the security desk and walked across the lobby. He approached the public waiting area and stood over Nadine, feet spread, hands on his belt, the posture of authority addressing someone beneath it. Ma'am, I need you to put the legal pad away. Why? Writing notes about security operations isn't permitted in the lobby. Policy. Which policy? Building security policy. There is no provision in the Federal Protective Service guidelines or the U.S. Marshals Service Courthouse security directives that prohibits a person in a public waiting area from writing in a personal notebook. Prewitt's face darkened. His right hand moved to his belt, not to a weapon, to the radio clipped beside it, but the gesture carried weight, the subconscious language of a man reaching for tools of authority when verbal authority failed. Ma'am, I'm telling you that I'm sitting in a public area using a pen and a legal pad, and I will continue to do so. If there is a written policy that prohibits this, I would like to see it. Prewitt stood over her for 4 seconds. Then he turned and walked back to the desk. He did not produce a policy. There was none to produce. At 7:04 a.m., 2 things happened simultaneously. An attorney, white, male, mid-50s, silk tie, monogrammed briefcase, walked through the checkpoint without stopping. Prewitt nodded at him the way you nod at a neighbor. No ID check. No bag search. The man walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and disappeared, and Nadine's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from a number she recognized but did not name in her notes. She read it, typed a 2-word reply. I'm here, and put the phone away. At 7:09 a.m., one of the handcuffed men in the waiting area, a heavy-set man in an orange jumpsuit with Alexandria Detention Center printed across the back, turned to Nadine. He had been watching her for 20 minutes, watching her sit, write, refuse, and sit again. They got you waiting too, huh? Nadine looked at him. They do. He nodded toward the security desk. That big one, Prewitt, he's been here 4 years, puts his hands on people. Got a thing about it. I've been through this checkpoint 9 times, 9 hearings. Same thing every time. If you don't look like you belong, you don't get through easy. I'm sorry you've experienced that. You don't look like you belong. He said it without malice. A simple observation, delivered with the resignation of a man who understood the taxonomy of this lobby better than the people who ran it. And neither do I. Difference is, I actually did something. Don't know what you did except show up. Nadine did not respond, but she wrote the exchange in her notes. Not because the man's words were evidence, because they were testimony, the kind that never made it into official reports because the people who experienced it were never asked. At 7:15 a.m., Embry left the security desk and walked to the public waiting area. She carried the clipboard with the sign-in sheet attached. Ma'am, I need you to sign the visitor log. Everyone in the waiting area signs in. Nadine looked at the clipboard. The log had columns for name, time of arrival, purpose of visit, and attorney/case number. She looked at the entries, 6 names from the morning. All had defendant or witness written in the purpose column. I'm not a visitor. Everyone sitting in this area is either a visitor or awaiting processing. You need to sign in. The 3 people who walked through your checkpoint between 6:02 and 6:04 this morning did not sign a visitor log. Embry's face tightened. Those individuals had credentials. Those individuals had bar cards. I have an appointment letter from the Attorney General of the United States. You chose not to accept it. Embry leaned closer. Her voice dropped, not to a whisper, but to the register people use when they want to be heard only by the person they're addressing, and the 2 or 3 people close enough to listen. Ma'am, I've been working this desk for 9 years. I've seen a lot of people come through here with a lot of stories. Some of them are true. Most of them aren't. Until someone with authority tells me you are who you say you are, you sit here, you sign the log, and you wait. That's how this works. I'll wait. I won't sign. Embry straightened. She looked at Nadine the way a person looks at a piece of furniture that has been placed in the wrong room, with mild irritation and absolute certainty that it will be moved eventually. Suit yourself. She returned to the desk. As she passed Prewitt, she said, loud enough to carry, "Credential issue. 4th floor claim. No verification. She's not going anywhere." 2 attorneys walking through the lobby slowed, looked toward Nadine, exchanged a glance, and continued to the elevator. One of them would, 40 minutes later, mention the situation to a law clerk on the 5th floor. The law clerk would tell another law clerk. The information would begin to travel. At 7:23 a.m., Prewitt's patience, or whatever calculation had been restraining him, expired. He walked to the waiting area. This time he did not stop at conversational distance. He walked directly to Nadine's chair, placed his hand on the back of it, his knuckles brushing her shoulder, and leaned down until his face was 18 inches from hers. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" His voice was low. "Because I've been doing this long enough to know when someone's running a game. The letter, the emails, the little notebook routine, I've seen it before. You want to know what I think?" Nadine did not lean away. She did not flinch. She looked directly at his face from 18 inches and said nothing. "I think someone gave you that letter. I think someone told you to come in here and make a scene. I think this is some kind of audit, some kind of test, and I don't appreciate being played. Remove your hand from my chair." "Or what?" The 2 words hung in the air. Or what? The dare of a man who had been wearing authority on his belt for long enough to believe it was part of his body. The dare of a man who had confused a uniform with permission. Or I will add physical intimidation to the list of documented incidents I am recording in this notebook, along with your name, your badge number, the time, and the camera position that is currently recording this interaction from approximately 11 feet above your left shoulder. Prewitt's hand came off the chair. He straightened. His face was flushed, a deep red that started at the collar of his uniform and climbed. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I'm just doing my job." "Then do it from behind the desk." He walked back. He did not look over his shoulder. Behind the desk, Embry watched him return. She said nothing. She did not need to. Her expression said it for her. The barely concealed amusement of a woman watching a colleague fail at something she considered beneath her own methods. Embry's approach was administrative. Prewitt's was physical. Both arrived at the same destination, a black woman in a plastic chair, waiting for permission to enter her own building. At 7:29 a.m., 2 attorneys got into an argument near the elevator bank. Voices rising, a discovery dispute, something about undisclosed documents and a missed deadline. One of them pointed a finger in the other's face. The other shoved the hand away. The first man stepped forward. Chest out, chin up, the posture of a man 2 seconds from throwing a punch in a federal building. The CSOs watched from the checkpoint. Prewitt put his hand on his radio. Embry looked toward Keel, who had reappeared from the corridor. Nobody moved. Nadine stood. She walked between the 2 men, placing herself exactly in the center of their confrontation, close enough that both had to step back. "Gentlemen, you are in a federal courthouse. Take this to the conference room on 2, or I will ensure it appears in the record." Both men stopped. The pointing finger came down. The puffed chest deflated. One of them looked at Nadine, looked at her suit, her posture, the absolute stillness in her face, and said, "Who are you?" Nadine turned and walked back to her chair. She did not answer. The argument was over. The two men separated, one to the elevator, one to the hallway, both carrying the confused certainty that they had just been managed by someone whose authority they could not identify but could not ignore. Prewitt watched from the desk. He had seen it, the way the lobby reorganized itself around this woman, the way she moved through confrontation without raising her voice, without identifying herself, without asking for compliance. She simply stated what would happen, and it happened. He noticed. He filed it away in the part of his brain that processed threats, not the part that processed information. If stories about everyday people standing up to power move you, drop a comment below. Your engagement helps more people see this story. At 7:41 a.m., Prewitt intercepted Nadine as she stood to use the restroom. "Where are you going?" "Restroom?" "Unverified individuals can't move freely in the building. I'll escort you." He walked behind her, 2 steps back, the distance of a corrections officer trailing an inmate during a facility transfer. Nadine said nothing. She walked at her own pace. When she reached the restroom door, Prewitt reached forward and placed his hand on her left arm. A steering grip, 4 fingers above the elbow, the kind of touch that communicated control rather than courtesy. Nadine stopped walking. She looked at the hand on her arm. She looked up, at the ceiling camera positioned above the restroom corridor, its dark dome angled to cover the full hallway. She looked at Prewitt. "Remove your hand." 2 words. The temperature in the hallway dropped by the weight of them. Prewitt's hand opened, his fingers uncurled. He stepped back. "Just doing my job." "Your job does not include placing your hands on a person who is not under arrest, not under investigation, and not posing a physical threat. If you touch me again, I will file a complaint with the U.S. Marshal's Service Office of Professional Responsibility, and the footage from that camera will be the first exhibit." She entered the restroom. The door closed behind her. Inside, she stood at the sink. Her reflection looked back. 51 years old, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, suit jacket creased from 2 hours in a plastic chair, the controlled expression of a woman who had learned long ago that the face you showed to power was the face power remembered. She pulled out her phone, made a call. "I'm at the courthouse. Credentials weren't activated. I'm being held in the public lobby." A pause. "No, I'm fine. Give it another hour. I want the full record." Another pause, shorter. "Yes, the cameras are recording. I've confirmed positions." She hung up. She washed her hands, dried them, checked her watch. 7:44 a.m. 46 minutes until the clerk's office opened. She had been in this building for 1 hour and 42 minutes. She had been searched, directed to defendant seating, had her property inspected without a receipt, had her appointment letter confiscated, been asked to surrender her phone without legal authority, been told she could not write notes, been asked to sign a defendant log, been physically intimidated at her chair, been followed to the restroom, and been physically grabbed by a security officer. All on camera, all in her notes, all on her first day. She returned to the lobby. Prewitt was at the desk, speaking into the phone again. This time, he was not cupping the receiver. His voice was audible. "Yeah, she's still here. Says she's reporting for Chambers, 4th floor. Doesn't have credentials. Has a letter. Could be real, could be fake, I can't tell. Keel took it. Yeah, no, I don't know, she's calm. Calm like she's waiting for something." He was right about one thing. She was waiting. At 7:52 a.m., Keel returned to the lobby with another officer, a younger marshal Nadine hadn't seen before, name tag reading Devlin. Keel walked to the waiting area. Devlin hung back, standing at parade rest near the elevator bank, watching. "Ma'am, I've been in contact with the district office. They're trying to locate your file, but the administrative staff doesn't come in until 8. Keel's tone was professional, clipped, the voice of a man following protocol he believed in completely. In the meantime, I have a few more questions. Go ahead. You stated you were appointed to the Eastern District. Can you tell me when your confirmation hearing was held? Nadine looked at him. The question was designed to test her. A credential check disguised as conversation. If she were fabricating the appointment, she would stumble on specifics. March 12th, Senate Judiciary Committee. Hearing lasted 47 minutes. I was confirmed by voice vote on March 19th. My commission was signed by the President on March 21st. Keel's expression did not change. And your previous position? Magistrate Judge, District of Columbia, 8 years. Before that, Assistant United States Attorney, Eastern District of Virginia, the same district I've been appointed to. You worked in this building before? I worked in the federal system. I tried cases in this building between 2008 and 2014. Keel absorbed this. The information was specific, verifiable, and delivered without hesitation. It was also, he was beginning to suspect, entirely true. But suspecting and confirming were different things, and his training, and his pride, demanded the latter before he admitted the former. I appreciate your patience, ma'am. We'll have this resolved as soon as possible. He turned and walked away. Devlin followed him. Neither looked back. Nadine wrote, 7:52 a.m. Keel conducted informal credentialing interview. Questions answered fully. No corrective action taken despite consistent, verifiable responses. Pattern. Verification requests escalate in specificity, while physical resolution remains static. At 7:58 a.m., the lobby door opened and a man walked in wearing the uniform of a senior U.S. Marshal, dress shirt, tie, the Silver Eagle insignia of a deputy chief. His name tag read, Beckett, Sloan Beckett, Deputy Chief Marshal, Eastern District of Virginia. Beckett spoke with Keel at the security desk for 3 minutes. Nadine watched. She could see Keel handing Beckett the appointment letter, pointing toward the waiting area, shaking his head. Beckett read the letter, read it fully, both pages, front and back. Then he walked across the lobby. His approach was different from Prewitt's. No aggression, no confrontation posture. Beckett was a bureaucrat, not a bouncer. He smiled the way people smile when they are about to offer something they know is insufficient. Good morning, ma'am. I'm Deputy Chief Marshal Beckett. I understand there's been a credentialing question. There's been a credentialing failure. The smile held, but the warmth behind it receded by 1 degree. Right. Well, I've reviewed your letter, and we're going to make some calls to get this sorted out. In the meantime, I'd like to move you to our conference room rather than the public lobby. More comfortable, more private. Am I being detained? No, ma'am, absolutely not. This is purely voluntary. Then I'll stay where I am. Beckett's smile thinned. Ma'am, the conference room has coffee, comfortable chairs. I have a chair. I'm fine. And it would be more appropriate for someone for anyone waiting for an extended period. Deputy Chief Beckett, I've been in this lobby for nearly 2 hours. I've been searched, redirected to defendant processing, had my property handled without a receipt, had my appointment letter taken by one of your deputies, been asked to surrender my phone without statutory authority, been physically intimidated by a court security officer who leaned over my chair and accused me of running a game, and been physically grabbed while walking to the restroom. I am not looking for a more comfortable chair. I am looking for the credentials I was told would be active 3 days ago. Beckett's face went through a careful recalibration, the expression of a man processing new information and immediately calculating its institutional implications. The mention of physical contact changed the mathematics. Complaints about rudeness were manageable. Complaints about unauthorized physical contact with documentation and camera footage were not. He glanced toward the security desk. Prewitt was watching. Embry was watching. Keel was pretending not to watch. I'm going to make some calls. Beckett turned and walked briskly toward the corridor behind the checkpoint. He pulled out his phone as he walked. At 8:05 a.m., a man Nadine did not recognize approached the waiting area. White, late 40s, well-dressed, the kind of suit that cost what most people paid in rent. He stopped in front of her, tilted his head slightly, and said, "Are you the new paralegal? I heard they were hiring." Nadine looked at him. She did not blink. She did not smile. "No." "Oh. Well, what are you... are you waiting for a hearing, or..." "I'm waiting." The man stood there for a moment, clearly expecting more information, then turned and walked toward the elevator. Behind the security desk, Embry allowed herself a small smile. Prewitt chuckled. Quiet, directed at no one, the laugh of a man whose assumptions had just been validated by someone else's. At 8:13 a.m., Ingham returned to the lobby. He approached the security desk and spoke with Embry, voices low, but Nadine caught fragments. Still showing pending, and can't override without authorization, and not my problem if the system... Nadine watched Ingham's hands as he spoke. His right hand was in his pocket, thumb rubbing against his thigh in a repetitive motion, the unconscious fidget of anxiety. His left hand gestured toward the computer terminal behind the desk. Whatever was on that screen, whatever he had found or not found, it was producing a physiological response that his mouth was trying to contradict. Then Ingham did something that shifted the geometry of the morning. He walked to the waiting area. He stood in front of Nadine, closer than Keel had stood, more casual than Beckett, with the particular confidence of a man who controlled systems rather than people, and believed that made him untouchable. "Ma'am, I'm from facilities. I've checked our system, and there's no active credentialing order for anyone named Okafor. No keycard request, no parking assignment, no chambers access. I don't know where you got that email, but it doesn't match our records." He was lying. The email was in her portfolio, 20 inches from his right hand. His reply, confirmed. All access activated, was time-stamped and stored on the USMS mail server, which archived every message for 7 years per federal records retention policy. He was lying to a person he believed could not prove it, in a lobby he believed was not being documented, about a system he believed he alone controlled. Nadine looked at him for 5 seconds. A long 5 seconds, the kind that made people fill the silence with justification. Ingham filled it. "Look, things fall through the cracks. It happens. If you really do have an appointment, I'd suggest you contact the administrative office directly and have them resubmit the request. These things usually take 3 to 5 business days to process. 3 to 5 business days. To activate a key card that should have been active 3 days ago, for a judge who was sitting in defendant seating in her own courthouse." "Thank you for that information," Nadine said. Her voice gave nothing away. "Could I have your full name and employee ID for my records?" Ingham's confidence flickered. Why would you need that?" "For my notes." He looked at the legal pad. He looked at the pen in her hand. He looked at the camera dome above them. Wells Ingham, Facilities. He did not provide an employee ID. He turned and walked away. Quickly. The pace of a man who had suddenly questioned whether the conversation he'd just had was a good idea. At 8:09 a.m., the lobby's morning traffic reached its first peak. A line formed at the checkpoint, 8 people deep, attorneys and clerks and witnesses shuffling through the metal detector in the orderly procession of a building waking up. Every one of them passed through in under a minute. Every one of them received the nod from Prewitt, the wave from Embry, the mechanical courtesy of a system functioning as designed, for them. Nadine sat in the plastic chair and watched the procession. She counted. Between 6:02 and 8:09, 23 individuals had passed through the checkpoint. She had noted the approximate screening time for each. The 3 who arrived before her, 35 to 40 seconds each. The 20 who arrived after, 40 seconds to 1 minute, 10 seconds each. None had been asked for more than a bar card or a building badge. None had been subjected to manual bag inspection. None had been asked to surrender personal devices. None had been directed to the waiting area. She was the only person who had been screened for more than 3 minutes. She was the only person sitting in the defendant section. She was the only black person who had entered through the main checkpoint that morning. These were facts. She wrote them down. At 8:12 a.m., the marshal escorting the handcuffed men stood and prepared to move them to the courtroom. As he passed Nadine's chair, he paused, looked at her, looked at the security desk. His brow furrowed, the expression of a man who recognized an irregularity but could not quite name it. "Ma'am, are you being held?" "I'm waiting for credential verification." "And they have you sitting here?" He glanced at the handcuffed men he was escorting, then back at Nadine. The comparison was not lost on him. "How long have you been waiting?" 2 hours and 8 minutes. The marshal's jaw tightened. He was a working officer, a man who spent his days transporting prisoners and securing courtrooms, not managing lobby politics. But he understood what he was seeing, a civilian seated in a detainee area for over 2 hours without charges, without explanation, without resolution. He stopped himself. Whatever he was going to say, he decided against it. He was not in the chain of command for this checkpoint. Prewitt and Keel were not his people. Getting involved meant reports, and reports meant attention, and attention in a building full of power meant consequences that flowed downhill. "I hope they get it sorted out soon," he said. He walked the handcuffed men toward courtroom 2. As he passed the security desk, he said something to Prewitt, brief, inaudible, that made Prewitt's face darken. At 8:15 a.m., a woman entered the lobby through the main entrance. She was in her 60s, silver hair pulled back, no-nonsense stride, carrying nothing but a handbag and a thick binder. She approached the checkpoint. Prewitt looked up. His posture transformed. Spine straightened, hands came off the belt. His voice shifted from command to deference. "Good morning, Judge Harmon." "Morning, Gage." She walked through the metal detector without removing a single item from her bag. No X-ray, no inspection, no ID check. The binder stayed in her hand. The handbag stayed on her shoulder. She did not slow down. She was through the checkpoint in 12 seconds. Judge Harmon, a white woman, a federal judge, waved through in 12 seconds with no identification presented, no bag scanned, no credentials verified. Nadine, a black woman, a federal judge, carrying an appointment letter from the Attorney General, had been sitting in defendant seating for 2 hours and 11 minutes. She did not write this observation in her notes. She did not need to. The cameras had recorded it. And the contrast, the 12 seconds versus the 2 hours, the warm greeting versus the single-word demand, the open passage versus the closed gate, would speak for itself in any proceeding that followed. At 8:20 a.m., Nadine stood to stretch. She had been sitting for over 2 hours. Her lower back ached, the complaint of a 51-year-old spine in a $20 chair designed for people whose comfort was not a priority. Prewitt materialized, 30 feet from the security desk in 4 seconds. "Ma'am, you need to stay seated." "I'm stretching." "You need to stay in the designated waiting area." "I am in the waiting area. I'm standing in it." "I need you seated." "Why?" "For security." "I'm standing in the same spot I've been sitting for 2 hours. I am stretching my back. This is not a security event." Prewitt stepped closer, close enough that Nadine could smell coffee on his breath and the synthetic fabric of his uniform. His right hand went to his belt again. The radio, always the radio, the talisman of authority. "Ma'am?" "Step back." He didn't. "I said step back." The lobby heard it. Not because she shouted, she didn't. The volume barely increased. But the authority in those 2 words filled the space between the marble walls and the high ceiling and settled into the ears of every person in the room like a physical weight. It was the voice of someone who had silenced courtrooms, who had commanded attention from attorneys and witnesses and officers for 2 decades, who knew, in the architecture of her vocal cords and the muscle memory of her diaphragm, exactly how to make 2 words occupy an entire room. Prewitt stepped back. 1 step. His face was red. "You don't want to make this difficult," he said. Quiet now. Just for her. "I haven't made anything difficult. You have. And everything you've done is being recorded. She pointed at the camera dome above them. 6:02 a.m. to now, all of it. She sat back down. Prewitt returned to the desk. He picked up the phone. He made another call. At 8:27 a.m., a young woman appeared in the lobby. Mid-20s, law clerk badge, carrying a stack of case files. She walked through the checkpoint. Prewitt waved her through without looking up, and headed for the elevator. She pressed the button, waited, and as the doors opened, she glanced toward the waiting area. She saw Nadine. She stopped. The elevator doors opened and closed in front of her without her entering. She walked across the lobby to the waiting area, slowly, the way a person approaches something they are not sure they should be approaching. "Good morning. Are you waiting for someone?" "I'm fine, thank you." The law clerk hesitated. She looked at Nadine, not the way Prewitt looked at her, not the way Embry looked at her, not the way the attorney had looked at her. She looked at Nadine the way a person looks at someone they recognize but cannot quite place. The face, the posture, the stillness. Something about it triggered a memory, or a briefing, or a photo on a judicial directory website that the clerk had scrolled past without fully registering. "Ma'am, is there anything I can do for you?" The deference was audible. Not loud, not performative, but present, a shift in register that moved the word ma'am from placeholder courtesy to genuine respect. Prewitt at the desk noticed. His eyes narrowed. "I appreciate that," Nadine said. "I'm fine." The clerk nodded. She walked back to the elevator, pressed the button, entered, and disappeared. As the doors closed, she pulled out her phone. At 8:34 a.m., a court reporter arrived through the main entrance. She was in her 50s, carrying a stenography case, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had worked this building for years. She walked through the checkpoint. Prewitt checked her badge, let her through, and headed for the corridor. She stopped. She looked toward the waiting area. She looked at Nadine. She turned and approached the security desk. She leaned toward Embry and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, but the lobby was marble and glass, and whispers carried. "Is that—" Embry cut her off. "Credential issue. It's handled." The court reporter looked back at Nadine. Her expression was complicated. Recognition fighting with caution. The arithmetic of someone who knew something but was not sure it was her place to say it. Her pace quickened as she walked down the corridor, and her hand went to her phone before she reached the first turn. 2 people in 5 minutes had looked at Nadine with something other than suspicion. 2 people had recognized, or nearly recognized, something that Prewitt and Embry and Keel had refused to see. At 8:39 a.m., Beckett returned to the lobby. He had been gone for 41 minutes. His face carried the particular expression of a man who has just received information that invalidates every decision made in his absence. He approached Keel at the security desk. He did not approach Nadine. He spoke in low tones, but again, marble and glass. "Confirmed. Senate confirmation. Commissioned 2 weeks ago. Should have had full access Friday." Keel's face went through the same journey Beckett's had traveled, compressed into 4 seconds. "Why wasn't I notified?" "That's what I'm trying to find out. Get Ingham in here. Now." Keel made a call. 2 minutes later, Ingham appeared from the back corridor. Beckett pulled him into the small office behind the security desk. The door closed. Nadine watched. She could not hear, but she could see, through the narrow window beside the office door, Beckett standing with his arms crossed, Ingham sitting, Beckett's mouth moving rapidly, Ingham shaking his head, Beckett pointing at the computer terminal, Ingham typing, Beckett leaning over his shoulder, then Beckett straightening and placing both hands flat on the desk. The universal posture of a supervisor who has just discovered that a subordinate has lied. Through the window, Nadine could see the computer screen, not the content, but the glow of it against Ingham's face, the way his eyes moved across lines of text that he already knew were there. His activation fields were blank. His confirmation email said otherwise. The distance between those 2 facts was about to become the most expensive discrepancy of his career. At 8:45 a.m., Prewitt made his final mistake of the morning. He walked to the waiting area one last time, but this time he did not stop at Nadine's chair. He picked up her banker's box, which she had set on the floor beside her, and began walking toward the security desk with it. "I'm going to need to re-inspect your belongings." Nadine stood. "Put the box down." "Ma'am, I have the authority to—" "You do not have the authority to seize personal property that has already been screened, inspected, and cleared by your own checkpoint. Put it down." Prewitt did not put it down. He continued walking. Nadine followed, not running, not rushing, but matching his pace with the determination of a woman whose patience had survived nearly 3 hours and was not going to fail in the last 20 minutes. She reached the security desk. Prewitt set the box on the counter. He opened the flaps again and reached inside. Nadine placed her hand flat on the counter, 6 inches from the box. "Do not open that." "Ma'am, you have searched this box once already. You catalogued no contraband. You issued no hold. You had no grounds for seizure the first time, and you have none now. If you open that box, you are conducting an unreasonable search of property belonging to a person who is not suspected of any crime, in a public building, on camera, after that person has repeatedly identified herself and provided documented evidence of her identity. Put the box down." The lobby was silent. Every person in the room, the public defender, the marshal escorting the handcuffed men, the 2 clerks who had just walked through the checkpoint, the attorney waiting for the elevator, was watching. Prewitt's hands were on the box flaps. His face was the color of a man whose pride was about to lose a fight with his survival instinct. His eyes moved to Embry, who was looking at her computer screen and not at him, to Keel, who was looking at his phone and not at him, to the camera dome, which was looking at him and recording everything. He pushed the box toward Nadine. He did not release it gently. He shoved it hard enough that it slid across the counter, and Nadine had to catch it before it went over the edge. The framed photo inside shifted. The glass made a sound, a small, sharp noise that could have been a crack. Nadine caught the box. She looked inside. The photograph was intact. The glass was not cracked. The sound had been the frame shifting against the brass clock. She looked at Prewitt. She did not speak. She carried the box back to the waiting area and sat down. She wrote 8:45 a.m. CSO Prewitt seized personal property without authority, property shoved across counter, excessive force on personal belongings, caught by owner before falling. 6th physical incident of the morning. At 8:51 a.m., the elevator doors opened and everything changed. Margaret Yoon stepped into the lobby. She was 61, Clerk of Court for the Eastern District of Virginia for the past 12 years, the administrative backbone of the courthouse, the person who processed every judicial appointment, every case assignment, every chamber's allocation. She carried a manila folder with a printed label. Okafor, Nadine A. Orientation. She walked toward the judicial elevator on the north side of the lobby. She pressed the button. She waited. Then she turned and looked at the lobby, the routine scan of a person who has worked in the same building for 30 years and notices when something is different. Her gaze passed over the checkpoint, the security desk, the corridor, the waiting area. She saw Nadine, sitting in the plastic chair, box on her lap, legal pad in hand, surrounded by defendants. Margaret Yoon crossed the lobby. Her heels struck the marble with a rhythm that accelerated as she walked. Not running, not rushing, but no longer strolling. The folder was clutched against her chest. "Judge Okafor?" Nadine looked up. "Good morning, Margaret." Why are you sitting here?" The word here carried the full weight of the question. Not why are you in the building, not why are you in the lobby. Why are you in this chair, in this section, with these people, on your first day? The lobby stopped. Prewitt, behind the desk, heard the word judge the way a man hears a fire alarm. The sound that reorganizes every priority, that retrospectively recolors every action, that makes the last 3 hours into a sequence of events that will need to be explained, documented, justified, and, probably, defended. Embry's clipboard slipped from her fingers and hit the desk. Keel, standing near the elevator bank, turned. His face carried the particular arithmetic of a man who was adding up the sum of his morning. The confiscated letter, the phone demand, the unverified woman he had left in a plastic chair, and arriving at a total that made his chest constrict. Yoon walked to the security desk. She did not lower her voice. This woman is a United States District Judge. She was confirmed by the United States Senate. She was commissioned to this courthouse. Her credentials were supposed to be activated last Friday. She placed the orientation folder on the desk, opened it, and pointed to the first page, a printout of the Judicial Commission bearing the signature of the President of the United States and the seal of the Department of Justice. Why is she sitting in defendant seating? Prewitt's mouth opened. The sound that came out was not a word. It was the beginning of a word, the consonant of an excuse that died before it became a sentence. We couldn't. The system didn't. Her appointment letter was on DOJ letterhead. I sent the credentialing email myself. Yoon turned to Nadine. Your Honor, I am deeply sorry. Please, let me take you to your chambers. Nadine stood. She picked up her box. She placed the legal pad in the portfolio. She looked at Prewitt. I'll need my appointment letter returned. Keel produced it from the folder on his desk. He held it out. His hand was not steady. Nadine took the letter. She did not thank him. She placed it in her portfolio. She followed Yoon to the judicial elevator. As the doors closed, she spoke. Margaret, I'll need the lobby security footage from 6 a.m. to now preserved, all of it, under the court's inherent authority to investigate conduct within its own facility. Contact the Chief Judge's chambers and inform him I'm making a formal request. Yoon nodded. She was typing on her phone before the elevator reached the second floor. If this story is making your blood pressure rise, imagine how it ends. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. In the lobby below, Prewitt stood behind the security desk. Embry sat in her chair. Keel leaned against the wall near the elevator bank. Ingham had not emerged from the office. Beckett was on the phone, his voice low, urgent, the cadence of damage control. The camera dome above the checkpoint recorded all of it. Red light. Steady. The footage now belonged to a federal judge. In the small office behind the security desk, Beckett was already on the phone with the USMS district supervisor. Through the window, Nadine, had she still been in the lobby, would have seen him pacing, one hand on the back of his neck, the posture of a man calculating exposure. Prewitt sat behind the desk, staring at nothing. His hands were flat on the counter. Embry had turned her monitor off, a reflexive gesture, as if the screen itself might testify against her. Neither spoke. The silence between them was the silence of two people who understood, in the same instant, that the morning they had shared, the jokes, the glances, the comfortable consensus that the woman in the plastic chair was exactly what they assumed her to be, was now evidence. Keel stood at the elevator bank. He had not moved since Yoon said the word judge. His phone was in his hand. He had opened his contacts, scrolled to his union representative's number, and closed the app without calling. He opened it again. Closed it again. The indecision of a man who did not yet know whether he needed a lawyer, but suspected he might. And in the small office, Ingham sat at the terminal, staring at the red rejection message on his screen. The system had locked him out. The administrative hold, placed by the Office of Professional Responsibility at 8:51 a.m., 7 minutes before Yoon arrived in the lobby, meant that someone in the federal chain of command had already been notified. The investigation had begun before the reveal. The walls had started closing before anyone in the lobby knew the building was a trap. Ingham closed the browser. He cleared his search history, a futile gesture on a federal system where deletion was logged the same way creation was. Then he picked up the phone and dialed the 4th floor extension. 4 rings. No answer. Chambers 412 was smaller than Nadine expected, but larger than it needed to be. Dark wood bookshelves, empty. A mahogany desk, polished, bare. 2 leather chairs for visitors, a window overlooking the courthouse parking lot. She could see her car in the public garage across the street, the $4 an hour spot that existed because her reserved space had never been activated. She set the box on the desk, unpacked it in order. The photo of her mother went on the left corner of the desk, angled toward the chair, positioned so that Nadine would see it every time she looked up from her work. She examined the frame carefully. No cracks. The glass was intact. But the corner of the frame, the lower left, was dented. A small crescent of compressed wood where it had struck the metal counter 3 hours ago. She ran her thumb over the dent. Then she placed the photo and moved on. The brass clock went on the right side. The federal rules went on the shelf behind the desk, spine out. She opened the portfolio and removed the legal pad. She read through her entries, 15 of them now, spanning 6:04 a.m. to 8:51 a.m. 2 hours and 47 minutes. She placed the pad on the desk, centered, and set the pen beside it. Then she sat down, in her chair, in her chambers, in her courthouse. She did not smile. The building had tested her before she had tested it. The building had not passed. At 9:12 a.m., Yoon returned with the orientation folder and a key to the chambers. Your keycard should be active within the hour. The chief judge personally called facilities. Within the hour, Nadine repeated. I know. Yoon's face held the particular shame of someone who is not responsible for a failure, but is responsible for the system that produced it. Your Honor, I want you to know, the credentialing email was sent Friday. I confirmed receipt with Ingham personally. He told me it was done. It wasn't done. No, it wasn't. I'll need a copy of the email chain, the original, with headers and timestamps. Not a forward, the original. I'll have it within the hour. And Margaret, I'll need the building's camera system maintenance logs for this morning. Specifically any entries related to footage storage, buffer clearance, or archival processes between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. Yoon paused. The request was unusual. Maintenance logs for a camera system were not standard orientation materials. But she did not ask why. Judges did not make unusual requests without unusual reasons. I'll request them from IT. From IT directly, not through Ingham. Yoon understood. She nodded and left. Nadine sat in the silence. The brass clock ticked, her father's clock, the one he had kept on his desk at the Postal Service office in Southeast D.C. for 31 years, the desk he had sat behind 6 days a week processing mail and filing forms and never once being asked whether he belonged in the building because the building was a post office, and the question was never about the building. At 9:30 a.m., Nadine opened the case file that had been placed in her chamber's inbox before her arrival. Her first assigned matter as a U.S. District Judge. Case number 4:26-CV-00881, filed by the Disability Rights Coalition of Northern Virginia. Plaintiffs alleged that the Albert V. Bryan Federal Courthouse, this courthouse, maintained security screening practices that discriminated against individuals with disabilities, non-English speakers, and racial minorities. The complaint cited disparate treatment at the main entrance checkpoint, wheelchair users subjected to prolonged secondary screenings, non-English speakers denied interpreter access during security interactions, and, in a passage that Nadine read twice, slowly, with the legal pad still open beside her, a pattern of differential treatment based on the apparent race and perceived socioeconomic status of individuals entering the building. The respondents, the United States Marshals Service and the Federal Protective Service, listed as fact witnesses in the original complaint regarding their roles in checkpoint administration: G. Prewitt, Court Security Officer; L. Embry, Senior Administrative Clerk, the same Prewitt who had grabbed her arm, the same Embry who had directed her to defendant processing, the same checkpoint she had spent 3 hours sitting beside, documenting exactly the kind of conduct the complaint described. Nadine closed the file. She opened the portfolio. She read her legal pad entries one more time. Then she picked up the phone on her desk, her phone, her chambers, and dialed the Chief Judge's office. This is Judge Okafor. I need to schedule an ex parte disclosure conference regarding case number 4:26-CV-00881. I have a recusal question under 28 U.S.C. Section 455 that needs to be addressed before the preliminary conference next Tuesday. Yes, it involves this morning. Yes, it's on camera. She hung up. She looked at the photo of her mother, standing beside the van, wearing the uniform she had sewn herself. The woman who had cleaned courthouses for 23 years and had never once been told she belonged in one. Nadine picked up the legal pad and turned to a fresh page. She wrote a single sentence at the top. The credential delay was not a glitch, it was a gate. Below the sentence, she began composing her formal complaint to the U.S. Marshals Service Office of Professional Responsibility. She worked methodically, referencing her contemporaneous notes, the email chain, the camera positions she had documented, the specific timestamps of each interaction. She cited 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. She cited the U.S. Marshal Service Policy Directive 11.1, which governed courthouse security screening and explicitly prohibited discriminatory treatment based on race, gender, or perceived status. She cited 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, the federal civil rights statute that had been used to hold law enforcement accountable for unconstitutional conduct since Reconstruction. Every citation was real. Every statute was current. Every allegation was supported by a contemporaneous note with a timestamp and a corresponding camera position. At 10:02 a.m., her desk phone rang. Judge Okafor, this is Deputy Chief Marshal Beckett. I'd like to come up to your chambers and discuss this morning. Deputy Chief Marshal Beckett, any communication regarding this morning's events should be directed to the U.S. Marshals Service Office of Professional Responsibility, which I have already contacted. I would also recommend that you preserve all security footage, communication logs, and credential system audit trails from this date. Spoliation of evidence in a matter involving potential civil rights violations would compound the issues significantly. Silence on the line. 3 seconds. Yes, Your Honor. He called her Your Honor. The first time anyone in his building had used the title. 3 hours and 58 minutes after she had walked through the front door. Good morning, Deputy Chief Marshal. She hung up. In the lobby below, Ingham sat at his terminal. His screen showed the credentialing system, the same system he had told Embry showed nothing active. The activation fields were blank: keycard, parking, chambers, all three. But in the system's audit log, in the metadata that Ingham did not know was being recorded, because facilities coordinators are not IT security specialists, and the system's logging functions were enabled by default and could not be disabled without administrator access he did not have, a new entry appeared. 8:54 a.m. User W. Ingham attempted to modify activation status for credential set JUD-4407 Okafor NA, bound from pending to active. Modification rejected. Field lock engaged by administrative hold, initiated by USM SOPR at 8:51 a.m. He had tried to backdate the activation. The system had not let him. The system had, in fact, recorded the attempt. The attempt itself was now evidence. Evidence that he knew the activation had not been completed. Evidence that he had tried to alter the record after the fact. Evidence that transformed a potential administrative oversight into something that looked, under federal law, considerably more deliberate. Ingham stared at the screen. The rejection message blinked at him in red text. He reached for his phone. He dialed a number, not Beckett's, not Embry's, a different number, an internal extension. The call log would later show it as originating from the facilities office and connecting to a phone on the 4th floor. The 4th floor, where the judicial chambers were, where Judge Okafor was now sitting. The call lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Neither party's words were recorded, but the connection was logged: time, duration, originating extension, receiving extension. And in her chambers, at a desk she had occupied for less than an hour, Nadine Okafor heard the phone ring on the empty desk across the hall. The desk in Chambers 414, vacant for 7 months since Judge Hargrove had taken senior status. The desk that no one should have been calling on a Monday morning at 8:56 a.m. when the building barely knew she existed. She heard it ring 4 times. Then stop. She stood. She walked to her doorway. She looked across the hall at the closed door of Chambers 414. The nameplate was blank. A brass rectangle with no name, no title, just the room number. She looked at the camera dome in the corner of the hallway. Red light. Steady. She returned to her desk. She picked up her pen. She turned to a new page. She wrote, 8:56 a.m. Internal call placed to Chambers 414. Vacant. Originating extension unknown. 4 rings. No answer. Anomaly noted. Below that, she wrote one more line. The last entry of a morning that had begun with a hand on her arm and a threat that had been aimed at a woman the building did not know was its judge. The call came from inside the building. Someone on the 4th floor was expecting contact. The question is from whom? She set the pen down. She looked at the photo of her mother. She looked at the dented corner of the frame, the small crescent of damage that Prewitt had put there when he dropped it on the counter at 6:07 a.m. She would not fix the dent. She would keep it. Evidence had its own kind of permanence, and some damage told a story more clearly than any restoration could. The clock ticked. The red light blinked. Downstairs, Prewitt was writing his incident report. He wrote it carefully, choosing words with the deliberation of a man who had never before needed to choose words carefully. He described the morning as a routine credentialing verification. He described his actions as consistent with standard checkpoint procedure. He did not mention the arm grab. He did not mention the legal pad demand. He did not mention leaning over her chair. He did not mention shoving the box. At his terminal beside the desk, Keel was writing a separate report. His version included details. Prewitt's did not. The phone request, the confiscated letter, the timeline. But his version also omitted details. The word judge in the subject line of the email he had held in his hand, the ease with which verification calls could have been made to after-hours numbers listed in the appointment letter's margins, the fact that he had spoken to Nadine for 3 separate intervals, totaling 11 minutes, and had not once considered that she might be telling the truth. Embry was not writing a report. She was composing an email to her union steward. The subject line read, "Potential adverse action. Need guidance." And Beckett, in the corridor, was on his 4th phone call of the hour. This one was to the USMS Office of Professional Responsibility in Washington. He was learning, in real time, that the OPR had been notified before he had, that someone had called them at 8:47 a.m., 4 minutes before Yoon arrived in the lobby, from a number he did not recognize but which the OPR described as a judicial chambers extension. Nadine had called the OPR before she called anyone else, before the clerk arrived, before the reveal, before anyone in the lobby knew who she was. She had filed her complaint while sitting in a plastic chair using her phone, in plain sight of the cameras, 8 feet from the men in handcuffs. She had built the case from inside the cage. Beckett hung up the phone. He stood in the corridor for a long moment. Then he walked to his office, closed the door, and sat in his chair, staring at the wall. The morning, her first morning, the morning the building would spend years trying to explain, was not over yet. By 10:15 a.m. on her first day, Nadine Okafor had unpacked a box, filed a federal complaint, and discovered that the case sitting in her inbox was a mirror of the morning she had just survived. She did not dwell on the coincidence. Coincidence was a word people used when they did not want to examine causation. She opened the case file again. Case number 4:26-CV-00881, the Disability Rights Coalition complaint against the courthouse security apparatus. She read the complaint carefully, page by page, the way she had been trained to read in her first year as a law clerk, not for narrative, but for structure. Who filed? When? What they alleged? What evidence was cited? What relief was requested? The plaintiffs allege that the Albert V. Bryan Federal Courthouse maintained screening practices at its main entrance that systematically subjected individuals with disabilities, non-English speakers, and racial minorities to more invasive, more prolonged, and more humiliating treatment than other individuals entering the same facility. The complaint cited 27 documented incidents over a 14-month period. Wheelchair users forced to transfer out of their chairs for pat-down searches, while ambulatory visitors walked through the metal detector untouched. Spanish-speaking witnesses denied interpreter assistance and turned away at the checkpoint. Black attorneys subjected to secondary bag inspections at rates 3 times higher than white attorneys entering during the same time windows. The statistics had been compiled by a civil rights research group using public records requests and volunteer court watchers who had logged checkpoint interactions from the lobby for 6 months. The methodology was rigorous. The pattern was unmistakable, and the fact witnesses listed in the complaint, the individuals whose conduct the plaintiffs described, included G. Prewitt, L. Embry, and D. Keel, 3 of the 5 people who had spent her morning ensuring she could not enter her own building. Nadine closed the file. She removed her reading glasses, set them on the desk, and pressed her thumb and forefinger against the bridge of her nose. The gesture lasted 3 seconds. Then she put the glasses back on, picked up the phone, and called Chief Judge Halloran's chambers. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She explained the morning, concisely, without emotion, in the language of a judicial officer making a required disclosure. She identified the case. She identified the conflict. She cited 28 U.S.C. Section 455, Subdivision A, the provision requiring recusal where a judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned, and Subdivision B.1, which applied when the judge had personal knowledge of disputed evidentiary facts concerning the proceeding. "I'm not ruling on my own recusal," she said. "I'm referring the question to you under 28 U.S.C. Section 351. I want the referral documented and the parties notified before Tuesday's preliminary conference." Chief Judge Halloran was quiet for a moment. Then, "Nadine, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Your Honor. I'd like to discuss the security footage preservation order at your earliest convenience. I'll have my clerk draft it within the hour. And Nadine, welcome to the Eastern District. I'm sorry it started this way." "Thank you, sir." She hung up. The welcome had arrived 4 hours late, and from the wrong person, but it had arrived. At 10:45 a.m., Yoon returned with 3 items. The first was the email chain, the original, with full headers and timestamps, printed from the USMS mail server. Nadine read it in sequence. Friday, 3:12 p.m. From USMS Administrative Services to W. Ingham, Alexandria Courthouse Facilities. Subject: New Judicial Officer, Credentialing. Judge Okafor, EDVA. The body included specific instructions, credential numbers, access codes, and a deadline of close of business Friday. Friday, 4:58 p.m. From W. Ingham to USMS Administrative Services. RE, New Judicial Officer Credentialing. Body, 1 line. Confirmed. All access activated. Sent 2 minutes before the end of his shift. Monday, 6:38 a.m. From W. Ingham to L. Embry. Subject FW credential check. Body, nothing in the system for that name. Looks like it never went through, not our issue. This email had been sent 3 minutes after Ingham checked the terminal in the lobby, 3 minutes after he told Embry aloud that nothing was active. The email created a written record of a statement he knew was false. Nadine placed the email chain in her portfolio beside her handwritten notes. The 2 documents, her contemporaneous log and the institutional email trail, now formed a parallel timeline. Her notes recorded what happened in the lobby. The emails recorded what happened behind the screen. Together, they told a story that neither could tell alone. The second item was the camera system maintenance log. Nadine scanned it quickly. Routine entries, automated processes, scheduled maintenance windows. Then she stopped. One entry. Monday, 6:03 a.m. Routine buffer clearance. Lobby camera 2, east entrance. Duration, 47 seconds. Footage gap, 6:03:12 to 6:04:01. 47 seconds. The precise window during which the three white attorneys had passed through the checkpoint without ID checks, without bag searches, without any screening at all. The footage that would have shown the differential treatment most clearly, the contrast between their passage and Nadine's, was gone. The maintenance log attributed the gap to an automated buffer clearance, but the log also showed that no other buffer clearance had occurred on any lobby camera during any Monday morning shift in the previous 6 months. The system's buffer clearance function was designed to run during overnight maintenance windows, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., not during active recording hours. Someone had triggered it manually, or someone had scheduled it to trigger at a specific time. Either way, 47 seconds of footage was missing, and the explanation did not hold. Nadine wrote, Camera 2 maintenance log shows buffer clearance at 6:03:12. First occurrence during active hours in 6 months. Gap covers passage of 3 individuals through checkpoint without screening. Anomaly consistent with manual intervention, not automated process. The third item was a building directory, a laminated card listing every office, every extension, every room number in the courthouse. Nadine found what she was looking for on the second page. Chambers 414, the vacant office across the hall, the phone that had rung at 8:56 a.m., was listed as unassigned, formerly Judge Hargrove. The extension was 44140. She turned to the directory's internal phone log, a supplemental sheet that Yoon had included without being asked, because Yoon had worked in federal courthouses long enough to know what judges needed before they asked for it. The log showed incoming and outgoing calls for all fourth-floor extensions, updated hourly. Extension 44140 had received 1 call that morning. Time, 8:56 a.m. Duration, 4 rings, no answer. Originating extension, 1107. Extension 1107. First floor. Nadine checked the directory. The extension was assigned to the facilities office. Ingham had called the vacant chambers from his office. At 8:56 a.m., 5 minutes after the OPR placed the administrative hold on her credentials, 7 minutes before Yoon arrived in the lobby. Why would a facilities coordinator call a vacant judicial chambers? What was he expecting to find? Or, more precisely, whom was he expecting to reach? Nadine did not write a conclusion. She wrote the facts, the extension numbers, the timestamps, the duration, the directory assignments. Conclusions were for proceedings. Facts were for files. If you're invested in seeing justice unfold, hit that subscribe button now. The next few minutes will change everything you think you know about this story. At 11 a.m., Nadine's keycard was activated. She tested it. The side entrance, the judicial elevator, the chamber's door. All 3 worked. The parking gate would be activated by end of day, Yoon said. The chief judge had made the call personally. 3 days late. After a formal complaint to the Office of Professional Responsibility, after a United States Senator's confirmation vote, after a presidential commission, it had taken all of that for a keycard to work. Nadine locked her chambers and walked the building. She had planned to do this on her first day anyway. Learn the layout, find the courtrooms, locate the library, identify the exits. The walk took 40 minutes. She moved through every floor, every corridor, noting camera positions the way she had noted them in the lobby. Automatically, without conscious effort, the habit of a woman who had spent her career in buildings where power was distributed unevenly and documentation was the only equalizer. On the 3rd floor, she passed courtroom 3, the courtroom assigned to her. She opened the door and stood in the threshold. Empty. Dark. The bench elevated 3 feet above the courtroom floor, the way federal courtrooms were designed. The judge literally above everyone else. The architecture of authority made physical. She did not enter. She She stood in the doorway and looked at the bench for 15 seconds. Then she closed the door and continued walking. On the first floor, she passed the facilities office. The door was closed. Through the narrow sidelight window, she could see Ingham at his desk, on the phone, one hand pressed flat against his forehead, the posture of a man receiving instructions he did not want. She did not stop. She did not look in. She continued to the lobby. The checkpoint was busy. Mid-morning foot traffic, attorneys and witnesses flowing through the metal detector. Prewitt was not at his post. A different CSO stood at the walk-through, scanning badges, waving people through. The plastic chairs in the waiting area were empty. Embry was at the administrative desk. She saw Nadine enter the lobby from the interior corridor, not from the front entrance, but from inside the building. From the judicial side. Wearing the same charcoal suit, carrying the same leather portfolio, but moving differently now. Moving like someone who belonged. Embry's eyes followed Nadine across the lobby. Their gazes met for 2 seconds. Nadine did not speak. Embry did not speak. The silence between them was louder than any sentence either could have constructed. Nadine returned to the 4th floor. She closed her chamber's door. She sat down and began preparing for Tuesday's preliminary conference, the one she would no longer preside over because the case had been reassigned to Chief Judge Halloran following her recusal. But she would attend the conference as an interested party, because the court's preservation order covered evidence relevant to both the civil rights complaint and her own administrative complaint. The proceedings were parallel. The evidence was shared, and the witnesses, Prewitt, Embry, Keel, would be called to account in both. At 1:15 p.m., her desk phone rang. "Your Honor, this is Margaret. The Chief Judge has issued the footage preservation order. All lobby security cameras, all corridor cameras on floors 1 through 4, all access system logs, and all email communications involving courthouse facilities staff for the period of Friday through today. The order names the U.S. Marshals Service and the Federal Protective Service as custodians." She paused. "There's one issue." "Go ahead." The 47-second gap on camera 2. IT reviewed the maintenance log. The buffer clearance was not scheduled. It was triggered manually from a terminal in the facilities office at 6:02 a.m. The terminal login was Ingham. "Yes." Nadine was quiet for 3 seconds. 6:02 a.m. The moment she had arrived at the checkpoint. The moment Prewitt had stepped forward and demanded her ID. At that exact moment, in the facilities office, Ingham had triggered a manual buffer clearance on the lobby camera that covered the east entrance, the camera whose footage would show the differential treatment of the attorneys who passed through before her. He had known she was coming. He had known what the morning would look like. And he had taken steps at 6:02, before the first confrontation, before the first word was spoken, to ensure that the most damning comparison would not be recorded. This was not negligence. This was preparation. "Margaret, I need the IT report in writing, with the terminal login data, the timestamp, and the name of the IT specialist who conducted the review. On my desk by 3 p.m. "Understood, Your Honor." She hung up. She sat very still for 1 minute. Then she picked up the phone and called the Office of Professional Responsibility. She asked for the investigator assigned to her complaint. She was transferred twice. She waited on hold for 4 minutes. Then a voice. "Agent Driscoll, OPR Investigations. How can I help you, Judge Okafor?" "Agent Driscoll, I'm supplementing my complaint with additional evidence." The 47-second footage gap on lobby camera 2 was not an automated system event. It was triggered manually from a facilities office terminal at 6:02 a.m., logged to the user account of Wells Ingham, the same individual who confirmed credential activation on Friday and failed to complete it. Silence. Then, "That changes the scope of this." "Yes, it does." "I'll need the IT report, the terminal logs, and the email chain." "The Chief Judge has issued a preservation order. All of it is secured. I'll have copies sent to your office today." "Judge Okafor, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe this was coordinated?" Nadine considered the question. She considered it the way she considered every question from the bench, carefully, without rushing, with respect for the weight of the answer. I believe the evidence shows that the credential failure, the footage gap, and the lobby treatment occurred on the same morning and involved the same individual in a coordinating role. Whether that constitutes coordination is your determination to make, not mine. I'm providing the evidence. You conduct the investigation. Understood. Thank you, Your Honor. She hung up. The word coordination sat in the room like smoke. She did not reach for it. She let it sit. At 12:30 p.m., Nadine left her chambers for the first time since arriving on the 4th floor. She walked to the courthouse cafeteria on the ground level, a small fluorescent-lit room with vending machines and 4 tables. She bought a bottle of water and a granola bar from the machine. She sat at the table nearest the window. 2 U.S. Marshals were eating lunch at the adjacent table. They recognized her. She could tell by the way their conversation stopped, mid-sentence, mid-chew, and did not resume. One of them nodded. The other looked at his sandwich. Neither introduced themselves. She ate the granola bar. She drank the water. She sat for 12 minutes. Then she stood, disposed of the wrapper and the bottle, and walked back to the elevator. In the elevator, she encountered Keel. He was coming down from the 3rd floor. The doors opened and they were face to face, 2 feet apart in a metal box with a camera in the corner. Keel's face went through 3 expressions in rapid sequence: recognition, panic, and a forced neutrality that fooled neither of them. He stepped to the side of the elevator. Nadine entered. She pressed 4. The doors closed. They rode in silence for 11 seconds. "Your Honor," Keel said. He did not look at her. He said it to the elevator door, to the brushed steel, to his own reflection. "I want you to know, Deputy Marshal Keel, I can't discuss the pending investigation with you. I'm sure your union representative has advised you of the same. Yes, ma'am. Have a good afternoon." The doors opened on 4. She stepped out. The doors closed behind her. She heard Keel exhale, a long, slow sound that the elevator shaft carried upward like a confession that had not quite been spoken. At 1:45 p.m., a package was delivered to her chambers by interoffice mail. Inside was a keycard, her permanent judicial credential, embossed with the seal of the Eastern District, her name, her photograph, and the words, United States District Judge. The photograph had been taken during her Senate confirmation process, 3 months ago. She looked younger in it, or perhaps she just looked like someone who had not yet spent a morning in a plastic chair being told she was in the wrong building. She clipped the credential to her suit jacket. She looked at it. The seal, the name, the title, the photograph. She had earned this card through 22 years of legal practice, 8 years on the magistrate bench, a Senate confirmation hearing, and a presidential commission. And she had been denied its physical equivalent, a working keycard, a functioning parking pass, access to her own chambers, by a man in khakis who had confirmed its activation in an email he had not bothered to follow through on. The gap between the credential and the keycard, between what she had earned and what the building had denied, was the gap this case would litigate. Not just for her. For the 27 people in the complaint who had been screened and searched and redirected and humiliated by a checkpoint that functioned as designed, letting through the people it expected and stopping the people it did not. The afternoon passed in the way first days pass when the first day has already been consumed by crisis, a series of administrative tasks performed with one eye on the work and the other on the phone. Orientation paperwork, case management system login, bar admission reciprocity forms, the mechanical bureaucracy of becoming a judge in a building that had spent the morning pretending she wasn't one. At 3:07 p.m., the IT report arrived. 3 pages. Technical, precise, devastating. The buffer clearance on lobby camera 2 had been initiated from terminal F-107, assigned to the facilities office, logged under user credential W.INGHAM. The command had been entered at 6:02:04 a.m. 4 seconds after 6:02. The buffer clearance completed at 6:03:12, and the camera resumed recording at 6:04:01. 47 seconds of footage permanently deleted from the local storage buffer. But, and this was the detail that made Nadine read the paragraph twice, the courthouse camera system maintained a redundant backup on a separate server, managed by the U.S. Marshals Service IT division, not by the facilities office. The backup captured a mirror feed from all lobby cameras with a 12-second delay. The buffer clearance had affected only the local storage. The backup server had captured 47 seconds of footage starting 12 seconds after the deletion command, meaning 35 of the 47 deleted seconds existed on the backup. 35 seconds of footage showing 3 white attorneys walking through the checkpoint without screening, while a black woman stood at the metal detector being asked for ID. The backup existed because Ingham did not know about it. The system he controlled was not the only system watching. This story is not just entertainment, it is a mirror. If you recognize the pattern, share it. More eyes, more change. At 4 p.m., Chief Judge Halloran called. Nadine, I've reassigned Case 4:26-CV-00881 to myself. Your recusal is noted on the docket. I've also received your disclosure filing. It's thorough. Are you willing to provide a declaration for the record? Yes, sir. I'll have it drafted by tomorrow morning. One more thing. The U.S. Attorney's Office called. They've been monitoring the OPR complaint. They want to know if you intend to pursue criminal referral under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Nadine paused. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, was a federal criminal statute. A referral would move the matter from administrative discipline to potential prosecution. It would mean a grand jury. It would mean subpoenas. It would mean national attention. I intend to cooperate fully with whatever investigation the OPR and the U.S. Attorney's Office deem appropriate, she said. I won't direct the scope. That's their determination. Understood. But Nadine, you should know that the footage, the emails, and your contemporaneous notes constitute a substantial evidentiary foundation. If the U.S. Attorney decides to proceed, your documentation will be central. I'm aware. Good. Get some rest tonight. You've had a day. She hung up. She did not smile at the understatement. She had not smiled all day. At 5:30 p.m., she packed her portfolio, the legal pad, the email chain, the IT report, the building directory with the phone log. She left the case files on the desk. She locked the chamber's door with the key card that had been activated 7 hours after it should have been. She took the judicial elevator to the lobby. The lobby was quiet. End of business. The building emptying. A different CSO stood at the checkpoint. Prewitt's shift had ended at 3, Embry's at 4. Keel had left at 2, according to the duty roster Yoon had shared during orientation. Nadine walked through the lobby, past the plastic chairs where she had sat for 2 hours and 47 minutes that morning, past the security desk where her appointment letter had been set face down, past the spot in the corridor where Prewitt had put his hand on her arm. She walked out through the main entrance, into the late afternoon light, and crossed the street to the public parking garage. Her car was where she had left it. The parking ticket on the dashboard showed 11 hours, $44. She started the engine. She sat in the car for 3 minutes without moving. Then she drove home. That evening, in her Arlington apartment, she made coffee in her mother's mug. She sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad and rewrote her notes. Clean copy, organized chronologically, cross-referenced to the email chain and the IT report. The declaration for Chief Judge Halloran would be drawn from these notes. Every word would be sworn under penalty of perjury. Every timestamp would be verified against the camera logs. Every claim would be supported by at least 2 independent sources. Her notes and either the footage, the emails, or the phone logs. At 9:15 p.m., her personal phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, a Virginia area code, but not one she recognized. Judge Okafor? Who is this? Who is... My name is Terrence Willard. I was in the courthouse lobby yesterday morning. We sat in the same row. The man in the handcuffs. The man who had told her that Pruitt puts his hands on people. The man who had said, "You don't look like you belong, and neither do I. Difference is, I actually did something. I remember you, Mr. Willard. I saw the news, about what happened, about who you are. I'm calling because—" His voice caught. He cleared his throat. "I've been through that checkpoint 9 times. Arraignment, status hearings, pre-trial, all of it. Every single time Pruitt searches me harder than he searches anyone else. Every single time Embry talks to me like I'm something she stepped in. And every single time, I'm the only person in the waiting area who looks like me." "I understand." "No offense, Your Honor, but you don't. Not yet. Because you went through it once. I've gone through it 9 times. And nobody wrote anything down. Nobody took notes. Nobody counted how many seconds the white attorneys got versus how many minutes I got. I just sat there and took it because what else was I going to do? File a complaint? Against the people who guard the building where my case is being heard?" Nadine was quiet. She let the silence hold the weight of what he was saying. "Mr. Willard, the case being litigated, the civil rights complaint, covers checkpoint treatment of everyone who enters the building, not just judicial officers. Everyone." "I know. I read the article. That's why I'm calling. I want to provide a statement about my experiences. Because 9 times, Judge. 9 times in 14 months. And I never said anything because I didn't think anyone would listen. Contact Denise Otero at the Disability Rights Coalition. She represents the plaintiffs. She'll want to hear from you." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Mr. Willard, you were right about something you said yesterday. You said you'd been through that checkpoint and nobody noticed. I noticed. And the 27 incidents in the civil rights complaint, those are people like you who were treated the same way. Your experience is evidence. It just hasn't been collected yet." Willard was quiet for 4 seconds. Then, "Nobody's ever told me my experience was evidence before." "It is, and it matters." She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The coffee was cold. The mug with her mother's company logo sat beside her elbow, the faded letters of a business that had been built by a woman who cleaned buildings she was never invited into. She worked until 11 p.m. Then she rinsed the mug, set it upside down on the drying rack, turned off the lights, and went to bed. She did not sleep well. She did not expect to. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m., Courtroom 1, Chief Judge Halloran presiding. The preliminary conference in Case 4:26-CV-00881 was scheduled for 30 minutes. It would last 2 hours and 14 minutes. Nadine sat in the gallery, not at counsel's table, not on the bench, but in the 3rd row of public seating. She wore the charcoal suit again. She carried the portfolio. She was a witness now, not a judge. The shift in position was deliberate, and it was uncomfortable. But 28 U.S.C. Section 455 required it, and she would not cut corners on the statute she had spent her career enforcing. Chief Judge Halloran took the bench. He was 64, silver-haired, former prosecutor, 22 years on the bench. He had a reputation for efficiency, impatience with procedural gamesmanship, and a particular disdain for government lawyers who showed up unprepared. The government was represented by Assistant U.S. Attorney Craig Fenwick, mid-40s, experienced, visibly uncomfortable. He had been briefed on the Monday morning events. He understood that his clients, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Federal Protective Service, were now defending a civil rights complaint in a building where a federal judge had been racially profiled by their own officers 24 hours ago. Plaintiff's counsel was Denise Otero, a civil rights attorney from a D.C. nonprofit. She was 41, direct, the kind of lawyer who prepared cases the way engineers built bridges, with redundancy at every structural point. Halloran opened the conference. "I've reviewed the complaint, the defendant's preliminary response, and a disclosure filing from Judge Okafor, who was originally assigned this case and has recused under Section 455. Miss Otero, Mr. Fenwick, I want to address the scope of discovery before we discuss scheduling." Fenwick stood. "Your Honor, the government's position is that the complaint describes isolated incidents that—" "Mr. Fenwick," Halloran's voice was quiet, and it was final. Before you complete that sentence, I want you to be aware that I have reviewed security footage from this building's lobby covering the morning of yesterday, Monday. I have reviewed email correspondence between Courthouse facilities staff and the U.S. Marshals Service Administrative Office. And I have read Judge Okafor's sworn declaration describing her experience at the main entrance checkpoint between 6 a.m. and approximately 9 a.m. yesterday. He paused. Do you still want to use the word isolated? Fenwick's mouth closed. He looked at his notepad. He looked at the second chair, a young associate who had no answers to offer. He looked at Chief Judge Halloran. No, Your Honor. The government would like to request a brief continuance to... Denied. We're proceeding with the scope discussion today. Ms. Otero, your discovery requests. Otero stood. She was ready. She had been ready since she learned at 7:45 last night about Nadine's morning. A tip from a contact at the OPR who had mentioned, in the most general terms permissible, that a significant complaint had been filed regarding the Alexandria Courthouse. Your Honor, plaintiffs request the following discovery: all security checkpoint screening logs for the past 18 months, all lobby camera footage for the same period, including metadata and maintenance logs, all credentialing system access logs, all internal communications between facility staff, court security officers, and U.S. Marshals personnel regarding screening protocols, credential processing, and, she paused, letting the silence do the work, any communications referencing specific individuals entering the building by name, physical description, or perceived identity. Fenwick objected. Your Honor, that's extraordinarily broad. The government is entitled to... Mr. Fenwick, let me be direct. Halloran leaned forward. Yesterday, a United States District Judge, confirmed by the Senate, commissioned by the President, was held in this building's defendant seating area for nearly 3 hours. Her property was seized. Her appointment letter was confiscated. She was physically touched without consent by a court security officer. She was directed to defendant processing by an administrative clerk. And the camera footage that would have captured the most clear evidence of differential treatment was manually deleted from a facilities office terminal at the precise moment the differential treatment began. He let that sit. You tell me whether the discovery request is too broad. Fenwick sat down. He did not object again. Halloran continued. I'm granting plaintiffs' discovery requests in full. The government will produce all responsive documents within 30 days. I'm also ordering the U.S. Marshals Service to designate a 30B6 witness to testify regarding checkpoint screening policies, credential activation procedures, and camera system maintenance protocols. That deposition will occur within 45 days. He turned to Fenwick. Mr. Fenwick, you should also be aware that the U.S. Marshals Service Office of Professional Responsibility has opened a formal investigation into Monday's events. That investigation runs on a parallel track to this litigation. I'm issuing a coordination order to ensure that evidence preservation obligations are satisfied for both proceedings. Spoliation of any kind, footage, emails, system logs, will result in adverse inference instructions at trial. Fenwick nodded. He was writing rapidly. The associate beside him was also writing. Neither looked up. Otero was not finished. Your Honor, I have one additional request. We ask the court to order production of the backup server footage, specifically the 35 seconds recovered from the redundant USMSIT server that captured the differential screening the facilities coordinator attempted to delete. That footage is central to our disparate treatment claim. Fenwick stood again. Your Honor, that footage is currently part of the OPR investigation. Producing it in civil discovery could compromise... Mr. Fenwick. Halloran removed his reading glasses and set them on the bench. The gesture was small. Its meaning was not. The government does not get to delete evidence and then claim the recovered version is too sensitive to produce. The footage will be produced within 14 days. If the OPR has concerns about specific operational details, they may submit a protective order proposal. But the footage itself is not privileged, it is not classified, and it is not optional. Fenwick sat down again. He had sat down 3 times in 20 minutes. Each time he rose with less confidence than the time before. Halloran addressed the courtroom. One final matter. Judge Okafor's declaration will be entered into the record as Exhibit 1 to the plaintiff's preliminary filing. It documents specific instances of differential treatment that fall squarely within the pattern alleged in the complaint. The declaration includes timestamps, camera positions, and cross-references to the email chain and IT report. It is sworn under penalty of perjury. It will be available to both parties. He looked at Nadine in the gallery. Briefly. Not with pity. With the particular respect that one judge extends to another when the system they both serve has failed one of them, and both of them know it. We're adjourned until the status conference on May 15th. Ms. Otero, Mr. Fenwick, I expect professional cooperation on discovery. If I hear about obstruction, delay, or gamesmanship, I will not be patient. The gavel fell. In the gallery, Nadine closed her portfolio. She stood. She walked to the aisle and toward the exit. As she reached the courtroom doors, Otero intercepted her. Not aggressively, but with the purposeful stride of a lawyer who recognized a windfall witness. Judge Okafor, I'm Denise Otero, counsel for the plaintiffs. I want you to know that your declaration, Ms. Otero, I can't discuss the substance of pending litigation with either party. My declaration speaks for itself. If you have questions about my testimony, they should be directed through proper channels. Otero nodded. She understood. Judges did not chat about their declarations in courthouse hallways. Of course, Your Honor. Thank you. Nadine walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. The doors opened. She entered alone. On the 4th floor, she returned to her chambers and sat down. She had become both judge and evidence, both officer of the court and exhibit. The dual status was uncomfortable, ethically complex, and, she suspected, unprecedented in the Eastern District. She opened her laptop and began working on her first set of case assignments, the routine motions and scheduling orders and discovery disputes that constituted the daily machinery of a federal judge's docket. The work was mundane. The work was necessary. She would not let one morning, however consequential, consume the career it had inaugurated. At 2 p.m., the Office of Professional Responsibility called. Judge Okafor, this is Agent Driscoll. I'm calling to inform you that as of today, the following personnel actions have been taken in connection with our investigation. Court Security Officer Gage Pruitt has been placed on administrative leave, paid, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the OPR investigation. Deputy U.S. Marshal Dorian Keel has been placed on administrative leave, paid, effective immediately, under the same terms. And Embry? Senior Administrative Clerk Lila Embry has received a written reprimand and has been reassigned to a non-public-facing position. She's been removed from the checkpoint. Ingham? Wells Ingham has been reassigned to the district's Norfolk office, effective Friday, pending the outcome of a separate investigation into the credentialing system records. The audit trail of his attempted modification has been preserved and forwarded to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And Deputy Chief Marshal Beckett? Driscoll paused. The pause was the answer, but he provided the words anyway. Deputy Chief Marshal Beckett has received a counseling memorandum regarding supervisory oversight. The memorandum will be placed in his personnel file. No further action at this time. A counseling memorandum. A piece of paper in a file. Language that acknowledged a failure without assigning blame, that documented a deficiency without imposing a consequence. The institutional equivalent of a furrowed brow. Visible, temporary, weightless. Nadine did not comment on the disparity. The officers who had touched her, demanded her phone, confiscated her letter, and directed her to defendant seating were on paid leave, still drawing salary, still accumulating pension credit, still technically employed. The man who had supervised them and failed to intervene received a note in his file. The man who had sabotaged her credentials and deleted camera footage was transferred to a different building. No one had been fired. No one had been charged. No one's career had ended. This was the system protecting itself. Denial first. Isolated incident. Then administrative leave. Not punishment, but quarantine. Removing the problem from public view without removing the person from the payroll. Then quiet reassignment, moving the liability to a different jurisdiction, letting distance serve as discipline. Then minimal retraining, a box checked, a seminar attended, a certificate generated. Then return to normal. Within 6 months, the leave would end, the reprimand would age into irrelevance, and the counseling memorandum would be buried under newer documents in a thickening file. Nadine knew this pattern. She had presided over cases that documented it. She had read depositions from officers who described it. She had written opinions that analyzed it. She was living it now. "Thank you, Agent Driscoll. I have one question." "Go ahead." The phone call from the facilities office to Chambers 414 at 8:56 a.m. "Has that been investigated?" Another pause. Longer. "We're aware of the call log entry. Chambers 414 is unassigned. The call connected to a landline phone in an empty office. We're treating it as an anomaly pending further investigation." An anomaly. Until we can determine intent, yes. "Agent Driscoll, the call was placed from Ingham's office extension, the same individual who sabotaged my credentials and deleted lobby camera footage, to a vacant chambers on the same floor as my assigned chambers, at the precise moment the OPR placed an administrative hold on my credential records. That's a significant number of coincidences converging on the same individual in the same 5-minute window." "I understand your concern, Your Honor. We're investigating." "I appreciate that. Please keep me informed." She hung up. She looked across the hall at the closed door of Chambers 414, the blank nameplate, the dark window. Who had Ingham expected to answer that call? Chambers 414 had been vacant for 7 months. Judge Hargrove had taken senior status and moved to the Richmond office. No one was assigned to the space. No one should have been receiving calls there, unless someone had been using the phone. Not officially. The directory listed the extension as inactive. But the phone itself was a physical object, plugged into a wall jack connected to the building's internal PBX system. Anyone with access to the room could pick it up. Anyone with a key, a facilities key, the kind Ingham carried on the lanyard clipped to his belt, could enter, close the door, and take calls that would be logged under an extension no one monitored. A dead drop. Not for documents, for conversations. An unmonitored line in an unoccupied room, used by someone who did not want calls traced to their own extension. Nadine did not write this theory in her notes. Theories were not facts, but she wrote the facts that supported it: the extension, the timestamps, the duration, the originating number, the vacancy of the chambers, the access requirements. She wrote them clearly, precisely, in the language of an evidentiary foundation waiting for an investigative superstructure. Then she closed the legal pad, locked it in her desk drawer, and returned to work. If this story is making you think about the buildings you walk through, who gets waved in and who gets stopped, share it. Subscribe for stories that hold power to account. 2 weeks passed. The OPR investigation continued, slowly, procedurally, with the grinding institutional pace that federal investigations maintained by design. Witnesses were interviewed, statements were taken. The footage, including the 35 seconds recovered from the backup server, was reviewed by 3 separate investigators who each wrote reports that arrived at the same conclusion. The checkpoint screening applied to Nadine Okafor on Monday morning was inconsistent with the screening applied to 23 other individuals who entered the building during the same time period, and the inconsistency correlated with race. During those 2 weeks, Nadine presided over her first hearings. She handled a motion to dismiss in a contract dispute on Wednesday. She conducted a scheduling conference in a patent case on Thursday. She ruled on a motion to suppress evidence in a drug case the following Monday, denying the motion, finding that the officers had acted within the scope of the warrant, writing a 12-page opinion that she completed at 1 a.m. in her apartment with the brass clock ticking on the kitchen table beside her laptop. She was doing the work. The work was hers, and she was doing it well. But the building watched her with a new attention. The security officers at the checkpoint stiffened when she approached. The administrative staff in the clerk's office spoke to her with a careful politeness that was louder than any rudeness, and the hallways went quiet when she walked through them in ways that hallways do not go quiet for people who are simply judges. She was a symbol now, of the building's failure, of the system's exposure, of the evidence that would not be suppressed. People she had never met knew her name and knew why they knew it. Some respected her for it, some resented her for it. Most simply wanted the attention to pass so the building could return to normal. On Thursday of the first week, Nadine encountered Embry in the second-floor corridor. Embry was carrying a box of case files from the records room, her new assignment, the non-public position she had been reassigned to after the reprimand. They passed within 3 feet of each other. Embry looked at the floor. Nadine looked at Embry. Neither spoke. The corridor was empty except for the two of them and the security camera at the far end. On Friday of the first week, Nadine received a call from her former colleague in the D.C. District Court, Judge Patricia Hollis, who had heard about the Monday incident through the judicial grapevine. "Nadine, the Federal Judges Association is asking whether you want to make a public statement." "No." "They're also asking whether you want them to make one on your behalf." "No." "Can I ask why?" "Because public statements are performances. I filed a complaint. I provided evidence. The investigation is proceeding. A public statement would make this about me, and this is about the building, about the checkpoint, about the 27 incidents in the complaint that happened before I arrived, and the incidents that will happen after the attention fades if the systems don't change." Hollis was quiet. Then, "You sound like a judge." "I am a judge." "I know. I worry about you in that building, alone." "I'm not alone. I have documentation." It was not a joke. It was not said as one. It was the truth, the particular, uncomfortable truth of a woman who had learned that institutional power responded to evidence, not emotion, and that the most effective form of self-defense in a federal courthouse was a legal pad and a working knowledge of the camera positions. Prewitt's incident report, the one he had written on Monday afternoon, the one that described the morning as a routine credentialing verification, was compared to the camera footage and found to contain 11 material omissions. The arm grab was not mentioned, the chair intimidation was not mentioned, the box seizure was not mentioned, the legal pad demand was not mentioned. The report described Prewitt's interactions with Nadine as professional and courteous. Keel's report was more complete, but contained its own omissions. The phone demand was described as an offer to secure personal electronics, and the confiscation of the appointment letter was described as temporary retention of unverified documentation pending institutional confirmation. Neither report mentioned the word judge. Neither report acknowledged that the appointment letter, the document they had held in their hands, read with their eyes, set aside with their fingers, contained a judicial appointment confirmation on Department of Justice letterhead. The omissions were not accidental. They were the careful, practiced deletions of officers who understood that reports were not records of what happened, but records of what an institution wanted to have happened. The gap between the reports and the footage was the gap between narrative and evidence, and in federal proceedings, evidence won. Embry's written reprimand was entered into her personnel file. She did not contest it. Her union steward advised against it. The footage was too clear, the declaration too detailed, the institutional appetite for defending her too weak. She was reassigned to the records room on the second floor, processing case filings 8 hours a day, no public contact, no checkpoint access. It was not a demotion in title or pay. It was a demotion in everything else. Ingham's reassignment to the Norfolk office was completed on Friday. He packed his desk, surrendered his Alexandria keycard, and drove 90 minutes south to a smaller courthouse with a smaller facilities office and a supervisor who had been told, in general terms, to keep an eye on him. No formal charges were filed regarding the credentialing failure or the footage deletion, the U.S. Attorney's Office classified the evidence as under review, language that could mean active investigation or bureaucratic dormancy, depending on priorities that shifted with political weather. The audit trail of Ingham's backdating attempt was preserved on the USMS server. The IT report documenting the manual buffer clearance was filed with the OPR. The phone log showing the call to Chambers 414 was entered into evidence. All of it existed. All of it waited. Beckett's counseling memorandum was 3 paragraphs. It acknowledged supervisory gaps in the Monday morning response. It recommended enhanced communication protocols between checkpoint staff and senior marshals regarding credentialing inquiries. It did not use the word discrimination. It did not use the word failure. It used the word opportunity, as in, this incident presents an opportunity for process improvement. Beckett continued in his role. He continued supervising the checkpoint. He continued signing the daily screening logs. The counseling memorandum sat in his personnel file, growing older, growing quieter, growing more invisible with each passing week. This was the system's immune response, not justice, metabolism. The body identified the threat, isolated it, encapsulated it, and resumed normal function. The threat was not eliminated. It was contained. The difference mattered only to the people the system was designed to protect, and they were rarely consulted during the containment process. At the end of the second week, the DOJ Civil Rights Division sent a letter. It was addressed to the U.S. Marshals Service, Eastern District of Virginia. It was 3 pages. The operative paragraph read, "Based on information received, the Civil Rights Division is conducting a preliminary assessment to determine whether a formal investigation under 42 U.S.C. Section 12601 is warranted regarding security screening practices at the Albert V. Bryan Federal Courthouse, Alexandria, Virginia. This assessment is preliminary in nature and does not constitute a finding of violation." Preliminary assessment, not an investigation, an assessment of whether to investigate. The first step of the first step, a letter that said, in the bureaucratic dialect of federal enforcement, "We are looking at whether we should look at this." The letter was significant because it existed. DOJ did not send preliminary assessment letters casually. The threshold was substantial. Credible evidence of a pattern, not just an incident. Institutional conduct, not just individual misconduct. Systemic failure, not just a bad morning. The letter meant that someone at Maine Justice had reviewed the evidence and concluded that it warranted formal attention. It also meant that the process would take months, possibly years. Pattern or practice investigations under Section 12601 were among the most complex, most resource-intensive, and most politically sensitive undertakings in federal civil rights enforcement. They required dedicated teams, extensive document review, statistical analysis, and, ultimately, negotiation of consent decrees that federal courts would monitor for years. Nadine read the letter in her chambers. She read it twice. Then she placed it in the portfolio beside the email chain, the IT report, the phone log, the camera maintenance log, and the 15 pages of contemporaneous notes she had written in a plastic chair on her first day. The portfolio was thick now. It held the full evidentiary record of a morning that had lasted 2 hours and 47 minutes and would generate legal proceedings lasting years. She closed the portfolio. She placed it in the locked drawer. She returned to work. During the third week, 2 things happened that Nadine did not cause, but that deepened the case she had set in motion. The first, the Disability Rights Coalition's volunteer court watchers, energized by the publicity surrounding the Monday incident, expanded their checkpoint monitoring program. They recruited 12 additional volunteers, law students, retired attorneys, community advocates, and stationed them in the lobby in rotating 2-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Each volunteer carried a clipboard and a stopwatch. They logged every person who entered the building, noting the time of arrival, the approximate duration of screening, whether a bag search was conducted, whether ID was requested beyond a bar card or building badge, and, in a column that would later become the most cited data point in the litigation, the apparent race and gender of each individual. The data began accumulating. Within days, it confirmed what Nadine's morning had demonstrated in a single case. The checkpoint treated people differently based on what they looked like. Black visitors were screened for an average of 2 minutes and 41 seconds. White visitors were screened for an average of 47 seconds. Hispanic visitors fell between 1 minute and 18 seconds. The standard deviation was small. The pattern was consistent across shifts, across CSOs, across days of the week. It was not one officer's bias. It was the checkpoint's culture. The second, a local news reporter obtained a copy of Nadine's sworn declaration through a public records request. The declaration was a court filing, part of the public record in case 4:26-CV-00881. It was not sealed. It was not redacted. The reporter published the full text on a Tuesday morning, accompanied by a 3-paragraph story under the headline, "Federal Judge Held in Defendant Seating at Own Courthouse on First Day." The story was picked up by the wire services by noon. By 6 p.m., it was national. By Wednesday morning, 2 members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the committee that had confirmed Nadine 3 weeks earlier, had issued statements calling for a DOJ investigation. The DOJ was already investigating. The senator's statements added political pressure to a process that was already underway. The pressure was neither necessary nor unwelcome. It ensured that the preliminary assessment would not be allowed to die of bureaucratic neglect. Nadine did not comment publicly. She did not issue a statement. She did not speak to reporters. When a journalist called her chambers seeking comment, she transferred the call to the Clerk of Court's media liaison, who provided a 1-sentence response. Judge Okafor's declaration speaks for itself. It did. It was speaking loudly. At 4:45 p.m. on a Friday, 3 weeks after her first day, Nadine was reviewing a motion in limine when she heard a knock on her chamber's door. She opened it. A young woman stood in the hallway, the law clerk from the 5th floor, the one who had approached her in the lobby on that Monday morning, the one who had asked, "Is there anything I can do for you?" with deference that Prewitt had noticed and could not explain. "Your Honor, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Celia Marchetti. I'm a law clerk for Judge Davenport on 5. "I remember you, Ms. Marchetti. Come in." Celia entered. She was nervous. The fidgeting hands, the shallow breathing, the posture of someone about to say something she had been deliberating about for days. "Your Honor, I need to tell you something. On the Friday before your first day, the Friday when your credentials were supposed to be activated, I was working late. Around 4:45 p.m., I was on the 1st floor getting copies from the library. I passed the facilities office. The door was open. I heard Ingham on the phone." Nadine sat down. She did not prompt. She waited. "He said, I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I heard him say, 'It's handled. Monday morning she'll have to come through the front. Tell him I'll clear the buffer before 6. And then he laughed. And then he said something I didn't catch. And then he said, 4th floor, same extension as before.' The room was very quiet. Miss Marchetti, did you hear who he was speaking to?" "No, Your Honor. I couldn't see the phone. I don't know if it was a cell or the desk phone." "Did you tell anyone about this?" Celia's face flushed. "No, I didn't. I didn't know what it meant at the time. It was just a conversation. I didn't know who was starting on Monday. I didn't connect it until I saw you in the lobby and then heard what happened. And then I wasn't sure if it was my place, or if I had heard it right, or—" She stopped. "I should have said something sooner. You're saying something now. That matters." I wrote it down. That night, Friday night, after I heard the conversation. I always write things down when something feels off. It's in my journal. Dated, time-stamped. I can provide it. A contemporaneous note. Written before the events of Monday. Written before anyone knew what Monday would look like. A document that preceded the incident it corroborated. The strongest kind of evidence, because it could not have been manufactured after the fact. "Ms. Marchetti, I'm going to ask you to do something difficult. I need you to provide that journal entry, the original, not a copy, to Agent Driscoll at the U.S. Marshals Service Office of Professional Responsibility. I'll provide you with the contact information. You may want to consult with an attorney before doing so." "I understand, Your Honor." "And Ms. Marchetti, tell him." Those were Ingham's words? Tell him? Yes. Tell him I'll clear the buffer before 6. Him. Not her. Not them. Him. A singular male person who was expecting a report from Ingham about the camera buffer. A person who had advanced knowledge of Monday's plan. A person who was not Ingham, not Embry, not Pruitt, someone else. Someone Ingham reported to. Someone with enough authority or leverage to direct a facilities coordinator to delete courthouse camera footage and sabotage a federal judge's credentials. Someone who had not yet been identified. Someone who remained, as of this conversation, unnamed. Nadine walked Celia to the door. Thank you, Ms. Marchetti. What you've done takes courage. Celia stopped in the doorway. Your Honor, there's one more thing. The voice on the other end of the phone, I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the tone. It was authoritative. Not a peer, not a friend. Whoever Ingham was talking to, he was taking instructions, not giving them. He kept saying yes and understood between the parts I could hear, like a subordinate. You're certain? I've worked in government offices for 3 years. I know the difference between a conversation and a briefing. Ingham was being briefed. Nadine looked at the law clerk. 26 years old, 3 years into a career, standing in the doorway of a federal judge's chambers, providing testimony that could implicate someone she had not yet identified, someone with authority over a facilities coordinator, someone who operated from an unmonitored phone line, someone who had engineered the humiliation of a federal judge before her first day began. Ms. Marchetti, I want to be clear about something. What you've just told me may become part of a federal investigation. It may be subpoenaed. You may be asked to testify under oath. Are you prepared for that? Celia's hands were shaking, but her voice was not. Yes, Your Honor. I wrote it down because it felt wrong. It was wrong. And I'm tired of watching wrong things happen in this building and keeping quiet about them. Have there been other things? Celia hesitated. The hesitation was an answer. I should probably talk to Agent Driscoll about that. Yes, you should. Celia left. Nadine closed the door. She returned to her desk. She opened the drawer. She removed the portfolio. She turned to the last entry in the legal pad, the one she had written on Monday morning, the one about the phone call to Chambers 414. The call came from inside the building. Someone on the 4th floor was expecting contact. The question is from whom? She picked up her pen. Below the question, she wrote a single line, "Tell him." She closed the pad. She locked the drawer. She sat in her chair, in her chambers, in her courthouse, and she thought about the dented photograph on her desk. Her mother, standing beside the van, wearing the uniform she had sewn herself. A woman who had cleaned courthouse floors for 23 years and had never once been asked who she was, because the answer did not threaten anyone. Nadine was being asked, repeatedly, invasively, by people who did not want to hear the answer. She looked at the window. Late afternoon light slanted across the parking lot. She could see her car, parked in Space 14, Level B2, the reserved judicial space that now worked, that had always been hers, that had been locked to her by a man who had laughed about it on a Friday afternoon while a law clerk listened from the hallway. She looked at the camera dome in the corner of her chambers. The red light was steady, always recording. The building watched everything and remembered nothing unless someone forced it to. She was forcing it. On her desk, beside the photograph, an envelope sat unopened. It had been placed there by the afternoon mail delivery. Standard interoffice mail, no return address, sealed with a single piece of tape. She had noticed it when she returned from the hallway with Celia, but had not opened it during the conversation. She opened it now. Inside was a single sheet of courthouse memo paper, unlined, no letterhead. The handwriting was small, precise, and unfamiliar. 2 lines. The 4:45 call came from the 4th floor. Welcome to Alexandria. Nadine read the note twice. She turned it over. Nothing on the back. She held it to the light. No watermark, no indentation from a second page, no trace of an envelope beyond the one it had arrived in. The 4:45 call. Friday. 4:45 p.m. The timestamp that appeared in the credentialing system log, the unidentified internal extension that had called Ingham's office 3 minutes before he sent his false confirmation email. The call that the OPR had not yet traced. The call that connected whoever was directing Ingham to the moment the sabotage was set in motion. And it came from the 4th floor. The judicial floor. The floor where Nadine now sat, where Judge Hargrove's vacant chambers still held a working phone on extension 4414, where someone had been taking and making calls that the building's directory listed as inactive. The note told her 2 things. First, someone inside the courthouse knew about the 4:45 call, knew its origin, knew its significance, knew that it connected the 4th floor to the facilities office and the facilities office to the sabotage. This person had knowledge that exceeded what had been made public. Second, the note was a warning disguised as a welcome. Welcome to Alexandria was not a greeting. It was an orientation, the kind given to new arrivals in hostile territory, the kind that said, "Here is the landscape, here is the threat. Here is what you need to know to survive." Someone in the building wanted her to know the truth, and someone in the building wanted her to understand that the truth was not yet safe. Nadine placed the note in the portfolio. She placed the portfolio in the locked drawer. She locked the drawer with the small brass key she kept on a ring with her chamber's key and her car key. 3 keys, 3 locks, 3 boundaries between her evidence and anyone who might want to make it disappear. She stood. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She turned off the desk lamp. The chambers went dark except for the small red light in the corner, the camera dome, recording, watching, preserving whatever happened in this room for anyone who cared to look. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. She looked back at the desk, the photograph, the dented frame, the brass clock ticking in the darkness, the empty chair that she would return to Monday morning and every morning after that, in a building that had tried to keep her out and failed, in a system that was now trying to decide whether to hold itself accountable or simply wait for the attention to pass. She opened the door. She stepped into the hallway. She looked at the closed door of chambers 414, the blank nameplate, the dead extension, the room that someone had been using for purposes the investigation had not yet uncovered. The hallway was empty. The building was quiet. The investigation was ongoing. The preliminary assessment was preliminary. The administrative leaves were paid. The counseling memorandum was filed. The consent decree language was being drafted. The pattern or practice review had not yet begun. Nothing was finished. Nothing was resolved. The system had not collapsed or reformed or apologized in any way that cost it anything real. 2 officers were on leave. 1 clerk was in the records room. 1 facilities coordinator was in Norfolk. 1 deputy chief had a piece of paper in his file. And somewhere on the 4th floor, this floor, her floor, someone who had directed the whole operation remained unnamed, unidentified, and unaccountable. Small progress, not transformation. The foundation of something that might, in months or years, become accountability, or might, just as easily, become another file in another drawer in another building where the lights turned off at 5:30 and the cameras blinked red in the darkness. But the foundation was real. It was documented. It was sworn under penalty of perjury. It was entered into the record of a federal court and preserved on federal servers and backed up on systems that no facilities coordinator could reach. The evidence existed in multiple places, in multiple formats, under multiple custodians. It could not be deleted with a buffer clearance. It could not be omitted from an incident report. It could not be explained away with a counseling memorandum or dissolved with a reassignment to Norfolk. It was the kind of foundation her mother would have understood. Not because her mother knew federal law, but because her mother knew what it meant to build something on your hands and knees in a building that was not yours, for people who did not see you, and to do it so well that the work itself became undeniable. The brass clock on the desk ticked. The dented photograph caught the last light from the window. And somewhere in the building, in a records room on the 2nd floor, in a Norfolk office 90 minutes south, on a phone that still rang in a room that was supposed to be empty, the consequences of a Monday morning continued to accumulate. Nadine walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. The doors opened. She stepped inside. As the doors closed, she saw, reflected in the polished steel of the elevator interior, the hallway behind her. The closed door of 414, the blank nameplate, and beneath the door, visible for just a moment before the elevator doors sealed shut, a thin line of light. Someone was in chambers 414 at 4:58 on a Friday afternoon, in a room that had been vacant for 7 months, using a phone that was supposed to be dead, on the same floor where a federal judge was building a case that someone did not want built. The doors closed. The elevator descended. Nadine stood in the polished steel box, watching the floor numbers count down. 4, 3, 2, 1. And she thought about what the anonymous note had said. Welcome to Alexandria. She had been welcomed. She had been tested. She had been grabbed, searched, seated among defendants, told she did not belong, and handed a case file that proved the building knew exactly what it was doing. And she was still here, still documenting, still working, still sitting in the chair that was hers, behind the desk that was hers, in the chambers that were hers, in a building that had tried to keep her out and would spend the next several years explaining why. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. The lobby was quiet. The checkpoint was closing for the day. A different CSO was stacking trays, shutting down the X-ray machine, locking the cabinet where confiscated items were stored. Water bottles and pocket knives, and on one Monday morning 3 weeks ago, a banker's box containing a photograph, a clock, and a copy of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Nadine walked through the lobby. She did not look at the plastic chairs. She did not look at the security desk. She walked through the main entrance, into the evening air, and crossed the street to level B2, space 14. Her car was there. Her parking pass worked. The gate arm rose without hesitation. She drove home. She made coffee in her mother's mug. She sat at the kitchen table, and she did not work. She sat with the coffee and the silence and the knowledge that somewhere behind her, in a building made of limestone and glass and carved letters that spelled United States Courthouse, the light in chambers 414 was still on, and the red light in every camera in the building blinked on, steady, always steady, whether anyone was watching or not.